Good evening. Welcome to the Monday, September 11th meeting of the Board of Selectmen, Planning Board, Economic Development Committee. I need to state that this meeting is being recorded without objection from the Board of Selectmen, Economic Development Committee, or Planning Board. The Board of Selectmen Chair will facilitate the joint meeting posted to hear, review, and discuss the report presented to the Board of Selectmen relative to the Dudley Economic Development Park, and the Planning Board expected to adjourn as called by Planning Board Chair at the conclusion of the presentation, or take any action related to the presentation as may be called for by the Planning Board Chair. Please join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sorry?
Yeah. He's not mic'd over there, right?
Go ahead.
Jay.
Sullivan?
Mr. Chairman, before we get started, today is the anniversary of 9/11. It's a National Day of Remembrance. I think at this time it'd be appropriate to call for a moment of silence for those that lost, lost their life that day and have lost their life since fighting the war on terror. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank everyone who's attending.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Next on the agenda, presentation Dudley Economic Development Park. Presentation of grant-funded feasibility study relative to potential use and economic development opportunity of town-owned land behind the courthouse. Board of Selectmen Chair will call upon Planning Board and Economic Development Chairs to call upon members of their respective boards relative to the presentation to take votes or any other action relative thereto.
Mr. Chairman, thanks. As the board is aware, and the planning board is becoming aware, we were lucky enough to secure a grant from Mass Development to do a feasibility study to see what a suitable use might be for the 57.8 acres that are located behind the county courthouse. We've had many internal and public discussions about potential uses of that site. Some ideas were thrown around. There's a biotech need in the Commonwealth right now. There's an agricultural research need in the Commonwealth right now. So with the help and a lot of support from our town planner, we were able to get a grant through, with the help also with CMRPC, to do a feasibility study. And VRB was the successful vendor to do that study for us. Luke Mitchell, you may remember Luke from the Stevens Mill project, and his team has completed that study, and that's what we're going to hear about tonight.
Should I go ahead?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, a question. Would it be appropriate to ask questions during the presentation, or would the chair prefer that the presentation be completed before questions?
Would it be better if we completed the presentation, or would you rather have questions? I'm thinking at the end, but what would you prefer?
We can wait till the end.
Will we wait till the end? Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for having me tonight. As John mentioned, we first heard about this project, I think it was in December of 2022. And around that time, we visited the site and did a walkthrough. At the same time, we started doing a site investigation and looking online at some data sources and finding out about the site. But this isn't really, it's sort of frozen.
Hit your button again, see if that does.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So overview, the intent of the study was to, oh my gosh, thanks. Hold on. Sorry. There we go. Intent of this, oh. It seems to be.
See if you can help.
Any,
Amanda, could you see if you could help?
it's not really updating. So, yeah. Just give it 1 sec. Hopefully. Sorry, I would just jump into it, but it's quite helpful to have the visuals. So if you guys just give us a minute. Apologies. Plug it in again.
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like, we could move on to another portion of the agenda to keep everything rolling along while they're working through that. Maybe section 8.
Section 7, new business.
Sure.
Skip ahead to section 7 while we're addressing the technical issues. Dudley Grange parking waiver, permission for a parking waiver on Center Road on Saturday, September 30th, 2023, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Is there anyone here from the Grange?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Sullivan?
do we know what the purpose of that day is? Is that
Craft
fair? Oh, craft fair.
Craft Apple Festival. Mr. Marson?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we grant permission to the Dudley Grange for to waive parking restrictions on Center Road on Saturday, September 30th, 2023, from 10 a.m. till 3 p.m.
Second with a question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Sullivan.
If the mover would be so inclined, could we add in there per approval of the police and fire, just for traffic flow purposes? Have you guys just review it, make sure.
What's that?
No problem here.
Okay, no problems. Okay.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Next, Nichols College, request for a parking waiver on the west side of Center Road on Saturday, September 30th, 2023, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. from Healy Road to Olson Residence Hall for annual homecoming weekend. Is there anyone here from Nichols College about this request? Chief, go
Yeah,
ahead.
just real quick, the Director of Public Safety reached out to me. He has hired 2 police details for that day, one for Tanyard Road and one for Center Road. In the past years, during homecoming, that's usually the protocol. We usually have 2 officers for that detail. For the most part, nobody usually parks on Center Road. This is just in case they have a lot more people show up than they anticipated.
Do you have any questions or concerns about this?
As long as it's just the west side of Center Road, I have no problem. So as long as it's just on one side of the road.
Thank you, Chief. Clark?
Chairman, thank you. I think at the previous meeting, I mentioned the fact that we do not have a pilot agreement in effect with Nichols College. And my thought is that in the use of public ways, if you will, that we assess some fee to the college.
We assess some fee.
Fee, I'm not sure. I would leave that at the discretion of the board to determine what they think might be appropriate if they so desire.
Can we even impose, Mr. Ruda, can we even impose fees? Isn't that something?
You can have a local service charge, but it can't be for fire or police. We checked on that with town council already.
Any thoughts from the board on this? Nothing?
Mr. Chair, I think if they're gonna have police details up there, I understand what Mr. Clark is going with it, but I think with police details up there, we've never assessed any kind of fee in the past, so in the absence of that discussion, I think we either grant up or down on the request.
Mr. Marcy?
And just to that point, we are talking to the college about ways to work together outside of the pilot, which they don't want us to talk about right now, so just know that when we talk about things they ask for.
Any other discussion? What's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chair, make a motion to grant the request for a parking waiver on the west side of Center Road, Saturday, September 30th, 2023, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. from Healy Road to the Olson Residence Hall.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
3-1. Michelle? 3-1. Next on the agenda, approval of policies recommended by Edward J. Collins Jr. Center of Public Management as part of the Human Resources Review and Policy Development Agreement, Political Activity Policy, Anti-Discrimination, and Sexual Harassment Policy. Mr. Ruda?
Mr. Chairman, this is part of that grant that we received about 1.5 years ago. And instead of hitting everyone with these policies all at once, I'll just remind the board that these have been vetted by Town Labor Council, specifically political activity, anti-discrimination, sexual harassment, mimic what is already state law. And my recommendation would be to go ahead and adopt those so that we remain compliant. I'm doing these a few at a time to give the board an opportunity to read them in advance of the meeting and digest them.
Any question, Mr. Sullivan?
So the administrator, will these be included in the pre-employment packet when people come in for interviews and disseminated to current employees?
It depends on the type of policy it is. Anti-discrimination, sexual harassment already in the employee handbook. These would just be updates. Political activity would be more of a general policy, and that will be available to employees as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Any other questions, comments, anything? It's a pleasure of the board. Mr. Marcy.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the policies recommended by the Edward J. Collins Jr. Center for Public Management as part of the Human Resources Review and Policy Development Agreement for Political Activity Policy and Anti-Discrimination and Sexual Harassment Policy.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous.
Why don't we keep going on 8, and then I'm just going to suggest that maybe we get a regular cable.
Or use your laptop.
You could, well, I don't have it on my laptop, but actually I might have it on. All right, let me give it a try.
Can we go ahead with 8?
Yeah.
We'll go ahead
Keep
with
going,
8.
keep going.
Local appointments, local building inspector Jeff Murray, term to expire 9/30/2024. Pleasure of the board.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Question, Mr. Chair,
Mr. Sullivan.
to the administrator, is this as like a backup to the current building inspector, or is Jeff taking over?
No, this is a backup. We generally, if we need another building inspector, we pay other towns to come in under mutual aid.
Right.
The board appointed Jeff as a local inspector, and he's going to provide that backup if we need it for the time being, or should we have a retirement from our current building commissioner. We'll have some ability to plug the gap until we
I just
can
wanna
take care of it.
Thank Mr. Murray, too, for taking that on, his own initiative, as a directive.
Noted. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Do we have a motion?
Yes.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? No. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Next on the agenda, reappointment of election workers, terms to expire August 31st, 2024. Carol Antos, Elizabeth Beals, Linda Brink, Zachary Canoyer, Gianna DeSant, James Dunn, Catherine Joseph, James Kowarchik, Diana Kuzawa, Brian McCoy, Diane Moradzinski, Nancy Roy, Donald Wilson, Cheryl Bernardo, Heather Bose, Joanne Brinker, John Cunningham, Catherine DeRosa, Cynthia Wansky, Lori Joseph, Alice Kujawski, Margaret Makuga, Norma Mrazek, Joseph Narodsky, Louise Williams, Deborah Zidlow, Janice Brady, Jennifer Canoyer, Zachary Davey, Mary Devlin, Brandon Johnson, Judy Joy, Evelyn Kulis, Leslie Manthos, Maureen Morrissey, Joanne Putney, and Pamela Williams.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. We ready to go back, Mr. Ruda?
This is the
I see
previous
it there.
version.
Well, this is the report. That's fine. We can use this. I have a slideshow, which is a little more clear, but if that's what we have, that's okay.
This doesn't fit my tablet.
It doesn't? Okay. So if, yeah. John, but you're on your email? I could try emailing the PDF to you.
If it accepts it, sure.
Mr. Ruda, do we have time to move on to other
Yep.
things?
You keep on going, Mr. Chairman.
We will go with, I think we should skip over the town administrator's report just out of time. I think we should go with departmental communication. Police Chief, Marianto Conde, resignation and report.
Officer Conti recently resigned to give me a notice prior to, shortly after the last meeting. It took effect August 31st. He was a reserve officer since 2019, then became full-time in 2020. He has decided to leave law enforcement and pursue other career choices. So I'll be asking for the board to accept his resignation, and I would also be asking the board to give me the blessing to declare a vacancy for a full-time position.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Sullivan.
If appropriate this time, Mr. Chair, make a motion to accept with regret Officer Conti's resignation, have the police chief on our behalf, with your signature, maybe, to send him a letter thanking for his service to the town.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous.
Thank you, Mariana.
And next up, Lieutenant Anise moved from acting to permanent lieutenant.
On February 6th of this year, Lieutenant James Anise was promoted to acting lieutenant. That was due to the contractual obligations on my contract that I could step down as a chief, go back to a lieutenant position. I think from what I've gone through for the last 7 months, I think I'll stick it out. So based on that, I did a 6-month review for Lieutenant Anise. He has performed beyond what I expected. He has really done a good job with the position. So I would recommend that he be placed off probation and be placed on as a permanent police lieutenant.
Mr. Marcy?
Mr. Chairman, I wholeheartedly support this. Lieutenant Anise has done a great job backing up his chief, and even when chief has been away at conferences or events, or out of town, Jim had stepped in and done a great job. So I move to appoint James Anise from acting lieutenant to permanent lieutenant, or take, period.
Mr. Chair, second.
Sullivan?
And can we ask the chief to have the lieutenant come in next time he's on shift and we have a meeting, or if he wants to come in, just to congratulate him on the full-time appointment?
Absolutely.
I can do that.
Thanks, chief.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous.
And since we're on the department communication, Miss Lauren Milosh, she is our administrative assistant. She has given her resignation notice last week. Her last day is going to be Friday. She worked with the department since 2019. She worked through COVID. She went beyond her tasks during COVID times to help the town try to figure everything out. She has accepted a position as an admin assistant for NESPIN, which is the New England State Police Information Network. It's funded by Homeland Security. So her position is also going to be vacant. So I'll be asking for the board to accept her resignation and declare that vacancy and try to fill it as soon as possible. And just a quick clarification, those two positions were, especially the administrative assistant, she was going to be one of the positions that we were going to lose if the override failed. Officer Conti was going to lose or get cut if all the overrides failed. That was one of their main decisions why they went out and pursued other careers outside of Dudley. It was nothing to do with the department. It was just for financial issues.
It's a pleasure of the board.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Sullivan?
before I make the motion, on the admin, we post that, it's a non-union position, we post that internally first for anybody that may want to lateral into that, or we're gonna do
Through-
external and internal at the same time?
Through the chair, we're gonna ask the Board of Selectmen to lift the moratorium on hiring tonight, vote on that, and we're gonna price these, hopefully, these positions to move, get them posted internally and externally
Same
at
time.
the same time, and
Okay.
move forward so we can get this building reopened.
So, Mr. Chair,
Does it need to be on the agenda?
pending the lifting of the hiring freeze, which I assume is gonna happen,
9C.
make a motion that we allow the chief to begin the search for a full-time admin and a full-time patrol officer.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Mr. Marcy?
Just point of clarification. Did we need to have the admin actually on the agenda to add her to that motion?
No, because generally we would just move forward
Okay,
without
that's right. Okay.
board action.
Please.
So send her a letter to Mr. Chair, through the
Yes.
chief, thanking her for
Yes.
4 years of service.
Yes.
Agreed. Thank you.
Question, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Langer?
Do we have to declare the vacancy first?
No, it's through the chair, it's not a position that's appointed by the Board of Selectmen.
So it's just to give the chief the ability to publicize, work with the town to publicize the
Correct.
position.
We have a motion and a second. Any further? No? All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Are we ready to go back to the presentation? Thank you, Chief.
Thanks, Chief.
Chief.
All right, back to line 3, presentation, Dudley Economic Development Park. Take two.
Thank you. So the intent of our study was to assess the feasibility of developing a fully serviced economic development park for life sciences or advanced manufacturing in Dudley. There's a 58-acre parcel, which you'll see a map of in a few slides. And really, we were tasked with examining environmental and zoning constraints at the site and coming up with some alternative development concepts to explore what the development yield of the site could be to the end of achieving economic development. In other words, let's elevate the tax base, let's create jobs. So really that was our challenge, was to look at this site and see if it was a good site to do that. And if so, what could the site accommodate? Sorry, this is still a bit delayed, but I think it's moving forward. So here's a look at the existing conditions of the site. Again, it's around 58 acres. If you don't know this site, here's a map. It runs along Route 197, also known as West Main Street, bordered to the east by the residential development of Knollwood Road, very close to the Connecticut border. Slow transition, but here we go. This is a look at the elevation of the site. One thing that you'll notice if you get out there is it's on a hill, which we learned when we first visited the site with John and Bill and a few others from town, and that, of course, immediately jumped out to us as something that we would need to reconcile when it comes to site planning. So it's a north-south slope that changes roughly 200 feet. If you look at the northwest corner of the site, which is shown in green because that's the low point, it's around elevation 384 feet. If you look at the high point of the site, roughly to the southeast, where you can see it in red, that's around 200 feet higher than at the lowland part of the site. Another thing that you might notice, by the way, those thin white lines are the topography contours. You'll notice the remnants of an old train track corridor that sort of curves in the eastern part of the site. This map is a type of map that most people don't typically look at, but it's a slope map. So if in areas that you see that are green, that indicates that it's relatively flat. Areas that are shown in red have a steep slope. And on this map, where it shows in red with the white arrows going down the hill, that's around a 20-degree slope. Pretty significant slope. And then the areas in yellow are in between flat and steep, more shallow sloping grade. So really, of course, this opens up questions of developability. If a site is in portions of a site that are very steep, it's going to be more costly to develop those portions of the site. You need to do cut and fill to bring in access and to make it developable. So there are sites out there in the world that are so steep you cannot develop them. In this case, the site has some portions that would require extensive engineering in order to make it developable. So you'll see that reflected in the concept plans that we prepared. And for reference, I don't want to go back because it takes a while to transition. For reference, in that curving area that was the old rail bed, the walls that lead down to it are in some sections up to 10 degrees in steepness, which means that you have some constraints on that piece of the site as well. So this map shows the existing, I should say, the documented hydrology in wetlands. When I say documented, I mean that when you look at the state database of wetland resources, these intermittent streams are listed in that database. So really, there's three intermittent streams that traverse the site. You can see one of them that runs roughly parallel to Route 197. Again, if you remember the elevation map, that's the low point of the site. There are wetlands in that area of the site. There's an intermittent stream and wetlands. And then closer to the eastern part of the site, you'll see two intermittent streams. The one furthest to the east is more or less in the same location as the historic rail bed. It was formed by the historic rail bed. Once that rail bed was built, an intermittent stream was formed along with associated wetlands on either side of the stream. And then a little bit further to the west of that, you see another stream that runs down the hill towards and then crosses at Route 197. As documented streams, those are protected resources. It means that any development taking place within 100 feet of the shore, of the edge of those streams, are protected. Doesn't mean that you can't build stuff there. It means that it's subject to review by several bodies, including locally the Conservation Commission. So any construction that takes place within that 100-foot buffer, again, is regulated, needs to be done in a way that doesn't jeopardize the ecosystems that exist within those streams. So that's the documented hydrology in wetlands. Part of our process, we have a team of wetland scientists at VHB. So we asked one of them to come out and walk the site and observe and see if there was any undocumented wetland resources on the site. She identified 3. You can see them on the map shown with diagonal blue lines. Those are what are called isolated wetlands. They're not part of a stream system. They're essentially a depression in the ground where water, where a wetland resource forms. The soil becomes wet. Once that happens, you have native ecosystems to that isolated wetland. These are different than documented wetlands in terms of how regulated they are. Whether or not they become protected resources is something that you can't really figure out until you get to the point of moving forward with the project. For that reason, we wanted to provide, in the concepts that we designed, versions in which those wetlands were protected, and other more aggressive versions in which they were relocated. It's conceivable that relative to what the local Conservation Commission and the DEP determined, those wetlands could potentially be relocated to another portion of the site. So for the sake of figuring out what the real development yield of this project would be, we did include those concepts wherein those were relocated, which you'll see in a few slides. Questions about access as we were looking at the site. A natural question is, where are you going to pull traffic into the site? So these were 4 options that were identified early on. Not to say that all of them are good options, we just wanted to cast a wide net as we were getting started. So the first one, indicated with the number 1, is to pull traffic directly off of Route 197. Route 197 has fast traffic, so that was something that we wanted to consider. We brought a traffic engineer onto our project team to take a look at what the implications were of pulling traffic off of 197 at that location. Access point number 2, which you can see on the upper right-hand corner is coming through another parcel that is currently protected as an open space resource. The idea here was maybe we can find another piece of town-owned land that could become conservation land, and we could pull in traffic through here. We ultimately didn't end up moving forward with that option, but it was one thing that we considered. Number 3 and number 4, we're pulling in traffic from the residential area around Knollwood Road. For perhaps obvious reasons, this was somewhat challenging because we anticipated that neighbors would react negatively to having tractor-trailer trucks, small or large, coming through the residential development, and what that would mean for their community. So we ended up not really pursuing those options either, but those options are always on the table if and when the project moves forward. Looking at all 4 of these, there's complications with, or there are pros and cons to each one of them. So we wanted to make sure that we included it in our final deliverable if and when people wanted to go back and reconsider some of the other options. So when it comes to building warehouses or laboratories or factories or manufacturing sites, obviously utilities are important. Currently, there's no utilities servicing the site because it's forested woodlands. There's no development there. So there is a water and sewer line running along Route 197. It terminates a little bit off of this map to the northeast. So if development were to take place here, one option would be to extend that water and sewer line down Route 197 so it could serve the site. For water, another option that was identified early on was creating a fill tank on the top of the hill internally to the site that could pull water off of any number of sources and then feed the site through gravity. More on that in a few slides. Looking at the zoning of the site, as a large site, it happens to straddle 2 different zoning districts. One is the residential 87 district on the western, call it western third of the site. East of that is light industrial. I won't go through all of these, but you can see on the left there are different dimensional specifications associated with each of those zoning districts. If the development that is perhaps one day going to be constructed in this site occupies that space to the western portion of the site, then there would need to be a rezoning done, because currently that residential district does not allow for industrial development. If you look at the LI 43, which is the majority of the site and probably the portion of the site where most of the development would take place, none of the dimensional requirements listed here are things that we see as particularly restrictive. You could work within these parameters and still come up with a good development. You have a max building height of 45 feet, which is 2 to 3 stories, depending on the architecture of your facility. And most of the stuff we've been talking about is a single story, if it's manufacturing or warehousing. When it comes to laboratories, you can have multiple stories, but really we ended up focusing more on industrial and manufacturing relative to the challenges that come with life sciences development in this area, which I can talk a little bit more about in a few slides. Sorry if I can jump ahead. So just really quickly, beyond the actual physical constraints of the site itself and the land use regulatory framework underpinning the site, we put a little bit of thought into what the real estate market looks like in Dudley, in the county, in the Worcester area, to try to think realistically about what's the most likely in terms of, okay, if you build it, are you actually going to be able to find tenants to move in? We started by looking at biotech and life sciences. Is it gaining momentum in Worcester? Yes, there's development in biotech and life sciences taking place in Worcester. Certainly the largest sort of concentrations of life sciences are in places closer to Boston, Route 128, Cambridge, the Seaport, etc. You do, however, have life sciences that are being built in Worcester. Dudley is within the orbit of Worcester, but it's some drive away from Worcester. So as we see it, that means that there could be some potential demand for life sciences in Dudley. However, the biggest question there is on workforce. What we hear over and over again is that life science developers choose a location based on where can they find employees to work in the facility that they're going to build. It poses a challenge in a place like Dudley. There is workforce here. It's a lot of educated people, but as a smaller community, it might not have the same level of gravitas that maybe some sites that are already existing in Worcester might have. So it's just a challenge that we wanted to identify early on. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but we'd be remiss not to call it out in the report. Here are just some examples. I won't go through all of these, but some economic development parks located nearby in Grafton. These are helpful. I think it underscores that it's possible. It's being done in several places. Some of these are more technical, industrial, and manufacturing. Others are more geared towards life sciences. So again, I'll sort of jump through these. It's detailed, and there's more details in the report which y'all can review. So I'll jump ahead into the actual concepts that we came up with. Really, at the end, we came up with two concepts. The first one has two different variations, and then a second one. So in the first concept, the approach that we took was, what's the highest and best use of the site? In other words, we have some serious constraints on the site. It's the two biggest ones being the hydrology and the slope. In order to develop on the site, you're going to have to do a lot of cut and fill to mitigate the slope. So with the first concept, we wanted to figure out, okay, how much development can you fit on the site? We did, as I said, we did two iterations of concept one. This is concept 1A. And as you can see, really, we bifurcated the site into two portions on either side of the intermittent streams. Again, we wanted to avoid the intermittent streams since those are protected resources. In the eastern half of the site, or the eastern portion of the site, I should say, we found, according to our analysis, if you built all the parking that you needed to build, and if you allowed for all of the loading space that you would need in a facility like this, you could put a roughly 75,000 square foot manufacturing or warehouse facility. In this case, this drawing really shows a manufacturing footprint. 75,000 square feet is a decent size for a manufacturing facility. There's certainly plenty of manufacturing facilities that are smaller than 75,000 square feet. So we don't see that as prohibitively small. There's also manufacturing facilities that are larger than 75,000 square feet. But we work for a lot of developers in the industrial space, and 75,000 square feet is an opportunity that many manufacturing developers would be interested in looking at. So then over on the western portion of the site, again, this was the sort of most aggressive, this was an exercise to figure out how much square feet could you really fit. So what you see here is a 230,000 square foot manufacturing facility. It's a little bit hard to tell in this version. Do we have a 3D version? Yes, we do. You can see that larger facility on the western end again. So you can see that the idea here is that trucks would come in off of Route 197, wrap around the back end of the large facility, come around the front, and do their loading in the center of the building. The idea there is that if you have a central loading bay, that means you could have either a single tenant in the building or perhaps divided into two tenants, one on either side. They could each benefit from that loading facility in the center of the footprint. By the way, in terms of internal circulation, you see the roads going through here. We stuck to the standards that we always stick to, which is that you can't go steeper than 7%. Any steeper than 7%, it can be done, but it's not seen as ideal, especially in the winter conditions when you have snow and ice. You don't want to have big, heavy trucks driving on roads that are steeper than 7%. So, yeah, basically this version would allow for 305,000 square feet. And in this version, we didn't allow ourselves building any retaining walls because that can be quite expensive. In Concept 1B, shown here, it's a very similar approach, but we included a retaining wall. Retaining wall, in other words, it shores up where you have to do cut and fill. It creates basically a vertical, a separation between one side and another, versus doing a 3-to-1 slope, which is a little less costly. In this version, I guess you could call this the maximum yield with the retaining wall. The yield goes up to 375,000 square feet of manufacturing space, which is certainly not an insignificant amount of manufacturing space. There's some engineering costs to be considered here with cut and fill, not necessarily showing up on this image, but on this image you can see that a lot of cut and fill, in other words, bringing in soil from off-site, which can have a cost associated with it. And a next step for this process could be figuring out what those costs might be. So then moving along, Concept 2, this is the version that is more environmentally sensitive. This assumes that you can't build within the buffer of those undocumented wetlands. It's just to show that even if you do respect those additional wetlands on site, you can still fit a considerable amount of manufacturing program on the site. In this version, you end up with 4 smaller footprint buildings of 100,000 square feet, 33,000 square feet, 36,000 square feet, and 75,000 square feet, for a total of 244,000 square feet. So a lot of folks don't spend all day thinking about the square footage of manufacturing facilities. So what does that translate to in terms of a number of employees? You can assume that that means roughly 2 employees per 1,000 square feet. It's just a rule of thumb. But that, in this concept, that would translate into something like 500 jobs. And then in terms of what the impact would be on the tax base, that wasn't part of our scope, but you'd have a significant impact to the tax base. In other words, there'd be a high value associated with these commercial properties. So the owner would be paying a percentage of the value of their property for commercial taxes each year, which could lighten the load on residential taxpayers, et cetera, and all the standard reasons that you appreciate commercial tax income. So sorry, that was a lot, but that summarizes our investigation and the concepts that we came up with. In summary, it's a site that has some challenges associated with it. One issue that I anticipate being brought up is traffic, speaking about earlier. Route 197 does have traffic. Our traffic engineer told us that if you pull traffic off of Route 197, where we're showing it on this image, you're far enough away from that turn that you can see to the right, that you have lines of sight. Trucks can pull in and out without needing to signalize an intersection at that part of the road. So that to us was a good thing, meaning that you wouldn't have to introduce a new traffic signal. But yeah, in terms of the yield of the site, we see this as, again, not insignificant. If the town was able to look at this and determine that it made financial sense, we don't see any huge red flags about the site itself or the environmental conditions. So those are our findings, and if anybody has any questions, happy to entertain those.
Questions? Mr. Clark?
Yes, Mr. Mitchell, if I may. First of all, in your report, which is somewhat lengthier than what you presented this evening, mention is made of our proximity to 395. I'm not sure how you define proximity. I don't see 395 as being all that close. How did you find your way to 395 from this location? Maybe that's something I should take note of in future.
Sure. So certainly when it comes to manufacturing and warehousing, proximity to major roads.
We're talking commercial vehicles here,
Yes.
obviously.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a great question, great point. You know, I think it's something to consider. Developers of industrial facilities want to be as close as they can to major highways. So how proximate it is a great question. You're asking a very important question. And I think the feasibility of industrial development, it depends on what the market thinks. You know, if developers are interested in it, they're going to do their own analysis of how close they're to there.
What the market thinks aside, what are the residents to think in terms of, you mentioned that with the possibility of going through residential areas, and already have kind of dismissed this in some sense because it would be disruptive, I assume, to have these large vehicles in what is, again, essentially a residential area. But if you're bringing them in and bringing them on to 97, at some point they're going to be in a residential area if their intent is to go to 395.
Agreed. Yes.
You can't avoid that.
Sure.
I don't know that people would be very welcoming of that. I know there have been issues on Oxford Ave, I believe, with regards to the Ramco site, as far as vibration, some of the older houses there, and their ability and their foundations to be able to stand up to the heavy loads that are on those roads. And you, in all likelihood, would probably be using some of the same. We're looking at the Stevens Linen project, 156 apartments approximately, many of which will find their way to 395 by way of Bigelow Road through Webster, which is a 30-mile-an-hour zone, and supplemented by a number of residents who put up 30-mile-an-hour speed limits to try to remind people of that fact. What I would submit is there is no real proximity. I'd also submit that 197 is bracketed by two rather risky intersections. I believe wasn't there, Chief, last week, an accident at the bottom of 197?
Yes. Radisson Road, yes.
Yes, okay, and that's not a unique experience. I mean, that's not one in every 10 years or so. So your trucks are gonna be going up and down 197 regardless of how they're getting into this property. They're gonna be using that roadway. This is the wrong place, the wrong idea. Going through the residential areas, I can't, what are you gonna put in here? I mean, we talk about light manufacturing. I mean, there's an instance in Worcester right now where somebody who processes animal hides apparently is in trouble with the town of Worcester. Would that person likely relocate to Dudley? Would that be something we'd welcome into the community?
I think,
Or that's a little far-fetched. I'll take
a little
that
bit,
with that.
a little bit. But I think what we're doing here, I think I should add this context to this. We're entertaining a thought.
All right.
We've got a piece of town-owned property. As we've learned this last year, we could use some more tax revenue. Is there a way to turn that town-owned property into something that could bring jobs and tax revenue to town? This is exploring a thought. This isn't, there's no groundbreaking ceremony that's going to happen next Monday. Not next
You
Monday.
mentioned context. One of the contexts here is the hill. That hill, effectively, you will nuke that hill. I mean, we talked about Armageddon not that long ago in terms
Chief.
of terrible destructive things that were coming or befalling the community. They basically nuke the hill. It won't look anything like it does now if any one of these concepts comes to pass.
I know the Tufts Center Road and West Main has always been an area of problem. Even when the highway department cut back all the brush and everything, we had an accident there last week. The state is exploring the idea of putting a traffic light there. I believe Senator Fatman and are looking into having Mass DOT put a light there. Is it going to happen? I don't know, but they asked for all the reports for the last couple 5 years or so for the accidents, so they are exploring that idea of a light there.
Long overdue, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions, thoughts? Anyone?
Was this the only proposal that you looked at this property for? Was there any thought of looking at possibly like a retirement community, assisted living facility or something like this? Such as Overlook in Charlton?
Well, when we got started, the conversation was all about jobs and tax base and industrial economic development. So it wasn't part of our scope to look at residential.
Have you ever done a proposal for such a place?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We explore that all the time. It would certainly, you would certainly be able to achieve a site plan which alters the environment less than this does if you were to build multifamily, for sure. You have more narrow building footprints with that of 60 feet or so, double loaded corridor. And you could have several smaller buildings. So certainly when you do industrial development, you're going to need to alter the landscape a little bit more significantly. So from a straight up physical site planning perspective, yeah, multifamily it would be feasible here.
It could be lower impact.
It could be lower impact, yeah. Would create very few permanent jobs, if any. But, you know.
Even for like assisted living, I mean, they have.
Oh, perhaps for assisted living, sure.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, assisted living, nursing home, that type of thing. Because if you're an older person living in Dudley today and you want to, spend the rest of your life in Dudley, you don't have a lot of choices. You're either moving to Charlton or moving to Webster. And these facilities, I think, do employ a fair number of people.
Mr. Breyer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This particular piece of land came up when I was chairman of the planning board, and actually, I think, Jerry, you were on the planning board with me at the time when there was a subdivision proposed. And it left many of us with many sleepless nights because the developer that came in with that belligerent, I'm going to put a 40B low-income, housing development there, and you're not going to stop me. And originally it was about 100 and something houses, and then with plans they were going to do cluster development because that was the big thing at the time, right? You do these 7,500 square foot lots, and then you reserve a part for the open space. And we ended up killing it with a simple maneuver. Mass Highway would not approve a single curb cut into 197 because it's a death trap. It literally is. And the police chief at the time, Steve, had compiled all this data that showed basically from the courthouse down to Yummy's was just a disproportionate number of accidents, especially, you get that freezing rain, those dark winter nights when you got the road glare. It is not a good place for development. The other thing just to consider, the reason why it is light industrial zoned is we did that to stop any further residential development, because following the master plan, we restricted residential development in light industrial areas. And so we were able to kill any future 40B projects because it was industrial land. That's why it's there. And we also wanted to give the courthouse an opportunity for expansion because at the time, right, the state was looking for, if you remember, there was a motor vehicles was having issues in Southbridge, and we were trying to position for some sort of a state building that could be expanded upon that if we possibly could. But none of that materialized, and so through the last 20 years, it's just kind of stayed light industrial because it's just not, you did a beautiful presentation, but it's sort of like putting lipstick on a pig. It's a pig of a piece of property. And I think with the Economic Development Committee, when they did the plan, what they really wanted to focus in was on like Schofield Ave and where Henke Sass is and the mills that were in town. I know you talk about biotech companies. I did the rounds when I was part of that Central Mass Regional whole economic development plan. I met with a number of biotech companies, zero interest in Dudley. The only thing that ever came close to having fruition was expanding at the time Exit 3, Cudworth Road, shooting it across the French River, and to develop Oxford Ave. And we kind of squandered that. We brought that up at the time was a Walmart distribution center, and it just didn't happen. But then we saw IPG Photonics grow. And then so we zoned that light industrial, but then people individually spot zoned and said, I want residential, and now they want it back. Now we got a bunch of solar farms, so that opportunity's almost been squandered. And then just one other thing to just keep in mind. Very different. On May 25th of this year, a unanimous decision of the U.S. Supreme Court in Tyler versus Menepin County, Minnesota, that finding that home equity theft violates the takings clause of the Constitution's Fifth Amendment. No property owner should be stripped of all equity in their property over debts of any lesser amount. So the question you have to ask is, how much was owed in property taxes on this piece of land when the town took it? So hypothetically, if it went into foreclosure for $50,000 worth of property taxes, and all of a sudden this property is worth $1 million, you have to cut a check to the previous owner for $950,000. Massachusetts is one of the only states, was actually one of 20 states that allowed home equity theft up until the Supreme Court reversed that this May. So there's food for thought.
Actually, I'm pointing over there in the yellow hat. Could you remove the hat, please, sir? Thank you.
John just reminded me also of when we last rezoned did this rezoning for
Could I
the
stop
planning
you there?
board.
Your name, and I
Oh,
should
Jerry
have asked
Frank.
Mr. Breyer. I apologize.
Yeah,
Name and
Jerry
address.
Frank, Causeway Shores Road. That part of that massive rezoning that was done in Dudley put out a questionnaire to the entire town that was filled out by a number of people. And the main thing that came back through that questionnaire was that the people in Dudley wanted Dudley to remain rural. So I'm not sure if this thing, being an entrance to Dudley I think it's going to really take away from the rural look certainly on this one section. And I know that we need economic development in Dudley and more jobs or a bigger tax base, but we need to keep in mind that that's really what the people in Dudley, that was the main focus of what people wanted. And I just have another question. When this thing is completed, does it remain under the town ownership, or is it going to be turned over to a private, or does it become a privately owned thing?
I don't think we've gotten that far. Mr. Ruda, have we gotten that far?
This is just a feasibility study at this point.
Feasibility study, entertaining a thought, like I said. We're just trying to find, we had a grant to do this study. We're just
Yep.
trying to find ways to raise revenue in town, maybe some jobs at the same time.
Well, that brings back the question of revenue, that if it remains part of the town, would it be taxed? Or is it going to be another Nichols College, which doesn't pay taxes, if the town, if this continues to be under town ownership?
If I could just weigh in a little bit on that. Any project we've seen like this, where a town owns property and wants it to be developed for manufacturing or warehousing, they dispose of the property and it's ultimately owned by a private developer. I can't think of any cases where the town retains ownership and does a land lease or something like that. So I think it would be, if this were to move forward, most likely the town would want to issue a solicitation and sell the property.
This in the blue jacket? Sorry, I saw her.
Sorry,
Yeah.
after. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Sandy Peterson. I live at 29 Healy Road, and I've been in town for about 21 years. I'm still considered a new kid on the block here, but most of my focus while I've been in this town, because I love the beauty, the scenic areas, the natural habitats, has been to work in land conservation. And one of the things that I think people should be reminded of is that this particular property is actually surrounded by conservation land on 3 sides. There's the Wheelock Woods across 197. There's the Morse land to the east of that, on that area, at the top of the area. And there's the LeBlanc land that we just were actually able to protect not too long ago, a few years back. So there, and when I look at the rugged terrain and actually the beautiful forest and the historic aspects and importance of the Grand Trunk Railroad, I really think that this is not the spot to have this kind of development. I think there are other areas in town that might be more likely, and I'm certainly well aware that the town is looking for revenue, and I really appreciate what the board is trying to do in order to raise revenue. But I just feel like that consideration with what has been expressed in terms of the beauty of the town really needs to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Sullivan?
Yeah, just want to, first I just want to emphasize what the chairman said and Mr. Ruda. This is just a complete feasibility study based off a grant we got. Didn't cost the town any money. As Mrs. Peterson just said, we are looking for new ways. Any kind of project, Chairman of the Planning Board talked about assisted living would be years down the road. But I just wanted to address a couple things Mr. Breyer brought up. I wasn't on the board when the master plan was approved, but I came on right after that. And I was served with John when the developer wanted to build houses. And I think the intent then, when we rezoned it light industrial, was to mirror the zone across the street. I mean, yes, it effectively eliminated residential, but I just recall, yes, it helped block a project where the person was threatening us, literally on camera. But it was to mirror the zone, because I know I served with John, a couple other people on the board, one who was a developer, who still lives in town. He kind of recommended it too, saying that would be our corridor. Granted, it's a bad traffic zone, we all know that. So this is just a concept, but we talked about it being a corridor with industrial on both sides. And George Petrinos can speak to it more than I can. John's correct that we rezoned Oxford Ave for the benefit of the people over there. Then they came back and wanted it back to residential so they could grant property to children or grandchildren of the person who owned it. Then they came back and wanted the solar farm, but George can speak about it more than I. When the line was coming from Oxford, which tied in IPG, Wilson, there's a couple of religious institutions over there. The reason why it ultimately was going to go left anyway, but they tried to go down Oxford Ave and they hit ledge to the point where I believe when they were digging a test, they punctured a line. So it wasn't just zoning and zoning changes that made that not feasible. There was challenges with the land. And I'm not a lawyer, I don't pretend to be one. I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night. To play devil's advocate, what if we took that land for $250,000 in taxes and it's worth $500,000? If we even have to pay equity to somebody for a adversarial taking, that would be a question. If we get that far for town council, so, and I know John didn't do it on purpose, but to say 50 and it's worth $1 million means we have to pay $950. Someone somewhere is going to look at that and say, oh my God, the town has to pay $950, just like they almost had to do with the library. That was not a accurate number backed up with fact. And I know, I'm not saying John did it for any malintent. This is strictly a feasibility, and if we send it to the Economic Development Committee, which might be where we want to go, let them do a little more legwork on it, because that's what they were tasked with, finding economic opportunities in town. Bill Scanlon, the town planner, has done a lot of work on this. And if it comes back and they say, it's gonna be too much work, it's gonna damage the land too much, it's just a sizable piece with challenges, as Luke said, but we'd be remiss not to take free money to at least do a little bit of legwork to see if there's a benefit for the town. And I'm not saying up or down, I think it's a good idea, bad idea. It's just strictly, I don't think we should kill the project tonight without doing further work,
And start the conversation for something completely different.
or nothing. It could come back as nothing.
Anyone else have anything?
Just one final thought, if I may. I'm sorry, someone behind me?
Yeah,
Okay, gentlemen.
I just wanted to let someone else.
Oh,
You can-
go
you
ahead.
can- Lori?
Hi, my name's Ellen.
Oh, I was pointing to,
Oh, I'm sorry.
oh, okay, no, you're up, She
Okay.
yielded, go ahead.
I'm Ellen LaPrise, 23 Partridge Hill Road, Dudley. That was an excellent study. Thank you very much. It gives us a lot of food for me, it gives me a lot of food for thought. I don't like the idea of the industrial. I don't like the idea of the life sciences. I really don't. But it's bordered on 3 sides with conservation land. We don't have a real nice restaurant in town. It could be a great place for a great restaurant. And with that much space, I'm looking at this last map, there's a number of things you could do there, restaurant being only one of them. But anyways, thank you. That's
Thank
been
you.
very helpful.
Lori? Yes. Then we'll go to you, Mr. Clark, and then we'll go to you.
Good evening, Laurie Smith, Pierpont Road.
Yes.
I just wanted to say, I think this is a spot that makes sense to explore. I do think the location makes sense. It's not really in residential right now. I know 197 does get a lot of traffic, but I think and there are accidents there, but I think a lot of it is speed. And if you build up there, people would have to slow down if you have an entrance coming onto it. You could put signage and everything else that would get people to drive more responsibly on that. I do think that the town is looking to get some other revenue. We just look at our budget problems that we just had recently, and people were saying, it's almost all residential, whereas Charlton has a lot of business. This is our opportunity to explore getting businesses in town. And I don't agree that cars coming off of 395 would have to go through residential areas. Myself, if I was coming from there, I would probably go up Lake Street in Webster. So you'd go right up Main Street in Dudley, right into Webster, and go on Lake Street, and then get on the highway that way. I mean, there's many different ways that you would go. So I think it's a good idea to explore it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Mr. Clark?
We all, most of us, or many of us, will remember the last town meeting, the last at Shepherd Hill. And at that meeting, we were introduced to a legal concept, a law of unintended consequences. I think it was something to that effect, as I recall, from town council. And this thing is fraught with unintended consequences. And ultimately, I would say the only good thing about it is, and with all due respect to Mr. Mitchell, is that we didn't have to pay for it.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Wheelock? Did I miss anybody else?
Paul Wheelock, 28 Center Road. Just a fun fact, it's my understanding that when a town takes land in tax title, if they go to sell it, they have to put it up for auction for everyone to be able to purchase that property. So someone could, at auction, someone could come along and just want the piece of land for hunting, for deer hunting. So then all this work would be for nothing.
Mr. Wheelock?
I think we already own it. I don't think it's going to. I have to ask the treasurer, but we already own it, right? We're not going to tax title on this.
Sell it.
Yeah, but you have to sell it by auction.
It wouldn't be a tax title. Let the treasurer, that's
Mr.
his.
Carmignani, thank you.
Good evening. It is a tax possession, so there was a foreclosure, the year right of redemption to enter a plea to land court to vacate the possession has long been gone. So the disposition of it, if we've significantly improved it, then I think at one point you would enter into, you'd sort of get the second, third, fourth piece in place. We have a plan. This is what the town would like to do with it, and it would, maybe wouldn't be the public outcry auction, but it would be available to the general public. I really couldn't speak to it, but it doesn't sound like this is the first time something like this has been done. Really, at the end of the day, if there's a field behind your house and it's taken for taxes, normally there's a public outcry auction, and the town does their best to optimize what's recouped. As far as equity theft, I think this doesn't fall into anything like that. The idea that Mr. Sullivan loses his house and inside of 6 months the town turns around and sells it, the difference between what he owed and what was made as profit is seen to be returned to him. In other states, that's how it works. Again, back to unintended consequences, right now, I don't think the land court in Massachusetts, and I wouldn't dare speak for them, but it appears there's so much equity, almost artificial equity, because there's an inventory shortage of homes. Nobody's getting a foreclosure because there's got to be a way to get something bought out. If it's not by the homeowner, someone else will do it. So we've jumped around a few things. If the town has gone through, like when we went through 7 Corbin Road, is now 3 parcels. The town went through and had perk tests. We had a sign off from the water and sewer that water could go to there. There were demonstrated improvements to the property that the town made ahead of. So I don't think it's an exact equity theft. I want to say this was taken, 15 years ago? So we'd be breaking ground. Obviously, you'd want to go through proper channels before more effort is put in there, but I guess it's my understanding this is something that you could do. You're improving a property, and instead of it being, for argument's sake, $100,000, $200,000 that they had listed for it, it's now potentially $1 million site for sale. And the guidance that I've received from the state, it says anytime there is a sale, you should hold what's considered excess and reserve until the courts sort of iron all of this out.
So, just to clarify, this property would not have to go to auction if we were improving it with the...
I don't think you could go in the other room and negotiate a sale. I think you could sell it publicly, not at a public outcry auction where people are putting a paddle up. You would go through and get your agent saying the town is accepting offers for however many thousand square feet of manufacturing with 1 or 2 or 3 of these approved sites, considering the best usage, and you'd sort of back into what a price would be.
Mr. Sullivan.
I hate to put her on the spot, but we have a member of the Board of Assessors here who's a real estate agent who could probably speak with much more certainty to the process. If you want to call her up, if she's willing to come up.
Please.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you, Rich.
Hello, my name's Joanne Simsak, and actually, you probably don't need an assessor, you need me as a former selectman. We auctioned off 7 pieces of land that the town of Dudley owned at one time at an auction in the town hall, and we were able to do that. We had to publish it. It was done by an auctioneer. So even this parcel, at any point in time, if you chose to do that for the town, you could do that to raise revenue. What you have just gotten, you did a great thing in that you got a free, what I consider, an appraisal. It's a feasibility study, but you now know what you may not want to do. And you would have paid somebody a lot of money to find out what that feasible study has just told you. You could look at this parcel of land of a number of ways in which it could be used. We're restricted by what the zoning changes did as to what you can do with this land and you can't. But someone brought up a good statement. Somebody could buy a parcel of land just to go hunting on. They don't have to buy it to develop it. There are a lot of options, but you just saved the town a very expensive option with that feasibility study and what zoning says we can do. I'm sure we're not a town that wishes to restrict any kind of potential development. I heard the term 40B thrown out, and that's not our attitude of a community. We all know that you have to have housing available in a community to meet state requirements. So we don't make decisions that we don't want things in our community. We have to choose our words carefully on that. We'd be very smart. But right now, we have a parcel of land. You've explored one option. The feeling isn't, the general public feeling is that it's not great. I think the board's going to explore a little more with the safety, and maybe they will decide it doesn't make sense to go this route. But you have the ability to look at other ways to develop this land if you choose to, or just sell it. So I think this was great. I thought this was most enlightening, because it's not a logical thing for us right now in our town. Economic development has been going over this for 5 years, for 6 years, trying to figure out ways to bring business in, and we've got some tough locations to develop those parcels. But I think this was really interesting, and it explained a lot when you looked at the contour of the land, the zoning allowed, the safety. So it's just one route we can consider, but we don't have to make a decision tonight. We certainly can look at other avenues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne.
Anyone else? Anything? Mr. Durgan?
Has this site been perk tested?
I don't think we've gotten that
Because I know
far, have
water
we?
and sewer just put a moratorium on sewer west of fire station, I believe.
George is kind of shaking his head.
George?
Right to sword, Mr. Chairman.
The moratorium was put on right now for a study because we're having issues with the potash interceptor. That's the area down by the fire station. So we're not allowing any more hookups in a certain section of town as of, let's say, west of the fire station. We're actively researching the whole problem with the engineers right now to come up with some kind of solution to it. So that's how that started.
So that's a temporary thing, George?
Yeah, we hope so, but we can't tell you exactly the time frame right now. But we're working on it pretty stringently.
Ask a question, George. Ask a question.
Oh, go right ahead.
So, George, I hate to put your feet to the fire, but if we're looking at probably a 2 to 3 year anyway process, you think you guys would have that engineering figured out in 2 or 3 years?
We're not even think it's going to go that far right now. We've come up with some possible solutions, and we're looking at areas up by Nichols College that have shown some signs of a very active inflow of clean water for some reason. So if we can even identify those areas and cure them down, we're going to be in good shape. We can probably lift parts of it or all of it.
Is at the top of the hill, it's always wet, and we used to think it was a water leak?
Yeah, all coming up through the college. It could be a number of areas of, it could be leaders in the buildings that are coming in on a major rainstorm. That actively can fill a 6-inch pipe before you know it, and then you've got an active problem. So all that's going to be researched and looked at, and we're actually going to be starting it probably next week. We've been doing it now and get more hot and heavy into it as we go, and we'll keep the board updated, but we hope that it'll be a short-term process.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, George. Anything else? Anyone? Mr. Marcy?
Yeah, great presentation. I think this is great. Anytime that, the state wants to provide a grant for us to actually learn more about what we have for assets, that's great. To Joanne's point, now we know what we might not want to put there. And actually just knowing the topography and just looking at it makes you think. And now we know like what areas that we actually could put something on. So I thought that was pretty good. So again, this is just the beginning. you've heard me talk about the three pillars: public safety, economic development, and quality of life. Pillar number 2, squarely economic development. We'd be remiss and, not doing our jobs if we didn't pursue something like this, even if it's not like what eventually gets put there. I know everybody likes to come out and, swinging on why it's a bad idea. That's okay. That's okay. It's just like, we just want to, we have to have the discussion on what needs to go there. We need to do something, right? We need to do something. It could be nothing, but, nothing's happening there now. So this is why I welcome discussions like this, that, so we can get to a point where we can actually do something, sell it, get some sort of benefit from it. But town doesn't own a ton of property to do something like this. I know we have, corridors on other streets, but they're owned by other people, right? So if they choose to do something with it, that's great, but we can't force them to do that. So we're just trying to pull the levers of things we control, and this is why we did that. So I thought this is great. I mean, Alan's point about a restaurant, a brewery, we've always, like, some sort of destination to, come to Dudley would always be a great use of the land. But, even given its challenges on multiple levels, I hope we can come to something someday that will be a benefit for the town.
Maybe we could try a zip line park again, who knows?
Well, you got a
Anything
nice
else?
gorge to go over there.
What's that?
200 feet of drop.
Yeah, we can do quite a bit. Anything else? All right, next on this,
Mr. Chair, what do you want to, on this you mean, what are we going to do next? Kick it to?
well, no, next here, it says Board of Selectmen Chair will call upon Planning Board and Economic Development Chairs to call upon members of their respective boards relative to the presentation to take votes or any other action relative thereto.
Oh.
Mr. Clark? You're the chair.
Refer to the chair.
I don't think there's anything for us to vote on tonight, is there?
Just in case you wanted to.
Just informational. So if
I think I would submit we might want to give thanks to Mr. Mitchell for his presentation.
Yeah, I agree.
Looks great. I don't think you would have sold it if you didn't do anything. Just somebody's gonna look at it and be like, yeah, no, we're not buying this, but.
Do we need to adjourn our board from this meeting?
You don't need to do anything. It's just, if to take any votes or any other action relative thereto. And next up, Planning Board and Economic Development Committee adjourn. If you have nothing further, you can adjourn.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we adjourn at this point.
Mr. Ruda. He was moving his mouth and I heard sound.
I'd like to thank Mr. Mitchell for his work, and I did want to bring up the fact that we recently received a $30,000 grant for priority development in town, so I'd like to see the Economic Development Committee take
They're all ready.
charge of that.
Say that again?
You can repeat
We
that, Dennis.
were just notified last week that we applied for and were successful in getting a community compact grant for $30,000, which will allow the town to identify and establish priority development areas throughout the town. So I think that when we've gotten all the paperwork associated with that completed, a lot of that was due to the work of Olivia, our remote intern. We should revisit the topic and maybe refer that scope of that grant scope to the Economic Development Committee for them to take the first crack at it and take it right out of the board's hands at this point.
Great. Great. Thank you, Mr. Ruda. Yes, yeah, the other part here is the Economic Development Committee can adjourn unless you have any votes that you, take any votes or any other action relative thereto? No? You're good? Okay. We'll move on to the next item then. Town Administrator's Report. Thank you, Mr. Head.
Thank you.
Did we want to take a brief
Great to
recess?
see you again.
Excellent, thank you, guys.
Do you need a brief recess,
What
Mr. Ruda?
I'd like to do is allow the municipal aggregation company that has been patiently waiting to set up and move on with their
So
presentation.
quick recess.
Yeah,
Take five?
give them a second to get up here and set up.
We'll recess we don't need a motion for that, right?
You can just declare
Take,
recess.
take a brief recess, 10 minutes. Thank you. The, back in session. Next on the agenda is, let me find it here because we took everything out of order. Thank you, Mr. Fire Chief. Colonial Power Group Municipal Aggregation Program.
Mr.
Ritter.
Chairman, this is the Colonial Power Group. If you recall, the town meeting authorized by vote for the Board of Selectmen to pursue and contract a municipal power aggregator, and Colonial Group was a successful quote that we accepted. They're going to give a little bit of a public presentation about the timeline going forward to get the community in a position where it can actually purchase or opt into purchasing municipal aggregate power, which will give everybody hopefully a little bit of a break on their electric bills.
Thank you, Mr. Ruda.
Mark Capadona, Colonial Power, 5 Mount Royal Ave.
I'm Denise Allard, also from Colonial Power.
Joseph Capadona, also from Colonial Power.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us. So tonight, we're just going to discuss the process that has to happen at the local level, and kind of where we are now, kind of where we're going. And then there's also a state process that I apologize, but that's a little bit in limbo right now. Department of Public Utilities, a couple of weeks ago, issued some, I'm going to call them draft guidelines on how to move forward with aggregation. It's been a really slow process. We don't see that as the most advantageous route right now, but I'll get into that shortly. I'm going to hand it over to Denise right now, just talking about kind of what you've done, what we need to do next at the local level, and then we'll move on later on about what steps need to happen at the state level and how that might dovetail with those latest guidelines.
Okay. So you have in front of you an implementation outline. To start at the top, the first bullet is local adoption town meeting vote, which the town administrator also mentioned already. So you've already completed that first step. It's past town meeting. And that was just a vote to authorize aggregation to move forward. It doesn't commit you to anything. It's just to explore the process. The second bullet is aggregation consultant. So the town has already executed a consulting agreement with Colonial Power Group. So that step is also completed. The next step is for us, Colonial Power, to prepare an aggregation plan and supporting documents. That's an education and outreach plan, a sample opt-out notice, and some other supporting materials. So we have prepared those materials. It's basically we have a standard plan that allows maximum flexibility for the town, and Mark will explain a little more about the flexibility when he gets into the DPU guidelines that have come out. But this is maximum flexibility, so the town administrator has this set of documents, and I believe what we're asking is for that needs to be posted for 30 days for public review. So that would go up on the website for 30 days. And hard copy would also go at the town clerk's office or wherever else you would normally post hard copy documents for folks to review. And folks could comment for 30 days. Any comments that come in either in person or by email would need to be held on to. And then those would come over to us and be included in the town's Department of Public Utilities filing. But that's a 30-day process for the posting. And then after that 30 days, we'd ask this board to vote to approve the aggregation plan and supporting documents, so the town can move on to the Department of Energy Resources and the Department of Public Utilities. So that's kind of that's all you need to do left in the local approval process. And all that plan is it outlines how we're gonna take the town through meeting all the statute requirements of 164, 134 Mass General Law. So it's very flexible, it's very general, and that's intentional to give the town as much room to make decisions moving forward as it needs in terms of product selection, launch date, et cetera. So that's kind of where we are now. The town administrator is asking to be able to post those documents and start the public review period. And then once you get through the state, the local approval process, the next big section there is state approvals. Once you vote to approve the plan, we go on to a Department of Energy Resources consultation, so the documents go over to their attorney. They take a quick look to make sure they're in line with the statute. Then they schedule it's usually a 10 to 15 minute, it's usually a conference call where the town administrator could join that on your behalf. Mark and I would be on. And he's just gonna go through, make sure that the town administrator understands it's an opt-out aggregation. Everybody would be automatically moved to the aggregation unless they choose to opt out, et cetera. And once that requirement is met, the DOER would send over a letter of satisfaction saying the town met that responsibility. And then once you do that, you have all the components you need we would put together a large filing that would go over to the Department of Public Utilities. It's going to include Both votes, the town meeting vote and the select board vote, as well as the DOER letter, any meeting minutes where aggregation was discussed, it's gonna get all compiled, we're gonna do that. And our attorney will file that with the Department of Public Utilities. And then, I don't know if you want to talk about the timing and what that takes, but once that gets filed with the Department of Public Utilities, it's a little bit of a black hole right now with some new changes, so.
Mr.
I'll
Chair.
leave that to Mark.
Just for those of us who haven't gone that far down the rabbit hole yet, which is most of the people watching at home, could we just take like 5 minutes and explain what this program is?
Absolutely. So this program is about taking control of the basic service customers' supply portion of their bill. So anyone that's currently, everyone in town gets their electricity from National Grid. That's the monopoly. We're talking about the supply portion of your bill or the generation services side. It's a single line item. It's called basic service. So we're discussing actually the commodity or the electron running through the wires. National Grid owns the poles and wires, and that's what they are now, a poles and wires company. All they do is hang the grid. They don't generate electricity. All they do is take care of the poles and wires. So what we're talking about is going out on behalf of everyone that was on basic service. I'm certain everyone's going to remember last winter when National Grid was 33,891. That was a historic high, I mean, even higher than we thought it was going to be. But what this program does is allow the town to go out and purchase energy on behalf of those customers that haven't made a choice. If somebody's already out on third-party supply, this wouldn't affect them. They could always join the program. But the hope of this program is you're going to bring a choice that did not exist last winter. So last winter, anyone that had an aggregation, any town that had an aggregation price and basic service. Lots of people, given the rates, came flooding into the aggregation price. Let's say at some point in the future, the aggregation price, you can always leave this program without fee or penalty. You can always join this program without fee or penalty. That's why I'm telling you it's truly a choice. For everyone sitting up here at this desk, what we need to discuss most is it's an opt-out aggregation. So at the beginning of the program, once everything gets approved, if the town decided to move forth with a contract, before it started, everyone would receive a mailing. But if they didn't do anything, they would automatically be enrolled in the program. So big difference. They would not be opting in, and that has a lot to do with the way energy is procured, so that you have a load profile that they can bid on and get a better price. I want to make sure that I'm clear. It doesn't make a difference if everyone opted out of the program. The rate would still be there for the contracted price. There's no financial penalty or anything for the town. All the town is saying, we're going to bring our basic service customers to the marketplace, and they're now going to have a choice that they didn't have in the past. But if they don't do anything, say they got that mailing, didn't want to participate, but threw that mailing out, they would automatically be enrolled. That doesn't mean that the following month they couldn't get out of the program. And then if they realized that it was beneficial to be in the program, they could certainly join that later without fee or penalty. We can only move people on on their meter reads. But what we're talking about is truly having a choice when normally we haven't had a choice in the past in the town of Dudley. The hope is here to bring choices that didn't exist. And all I'm going to say is, in the past, the way basic service has worked, there's a winter price and a summer price. There's always opportunity. I want you to know the Department of Public Utilities was paying attention. They've now changed your basic service. So what used to be from November through March and then April through October is going to change. Everyone that's in Massachusetts, the rates are going to change February 1st through July 1st, through July 30th, and then August 1st through December 31st, through January 31st. Those will be the two periods. What will that do? That will help smooth out those 34-cent rates down to the 14 cents that you're now paying. So that 20-cent differential, given last winter, you probably still would have seen something around 22 to now it would be around 16 to 17, so that you wouldn't have that high spike. That's what they're trying to do, is smooth things out. It's one of the benefits of aggregation. We can go out in the marketplace. They get 2 days a year. We get 210 days a year to trade. They can buy 12-month strips only, and 50% of your needs, and they ladder those. 2-3 years ago, historic lows. I'm certain National Grid would have bought power if they had the ability to buy longer. all of our clients, which is why people have come to aggregation. We took about as long as the market, 40 months, 36 months, 42 months, because we have that ability. We can look at the curve and say, hey, we're at historic lows. Let's buy this for a long time. Again, we're not trying to hold anyone in the program, but we're trying to bring a choice. Now we're at what I'll still say fairly lofty prices. Nothing like, I just want you to know, what you had last winter is not what you're going to get this winter. I expect with the smoothing out, probably somewhere between 17 and 19 cents, but from a historic standpoint, brutally expensive. Again, half the price of last winter, but brutally expensive from a historic standpoint. Only one other time have we ever seen a 16-cent price, and that was during the polar vortex 2014. So to give you an idea, still going to have some lofty prices for basic service this winter, but I don't think it was going to have nearly the sharp stick in the eye that last winter brought. So what the town's trying to do here is on the supply portion of your bill, is control pricing and drive down those costs. Also, an ancillary benefit if anyone in town wanted to green things up, that's certainly another option, adding more renewables to the product. So you could choose a basic service product, that's a meets renewable portfolio standard, an RPS, or you could add more green to it. That's going to add cost, but that could be something that people opted into if they so desired. Again, more about choice that you don't currently have. So moving forward, what we're trying to do here is get the plan hung and approved onto the state process. And this is where I wanted to talk about kind of the dovetailing. So there's a tremendous shift. So the last, I'm going to say 6 years, municipal aggregation has been under duress. The Department of Public Utilities has been slowly eating away at the choices we believe this board should be making. The town administrator, the board should be making these decisions on behalf of it. But the department has been trying, well, we've asked the department to regulate. They're a regulating agency. Guess what they're doing? They're regulating. And I believe that they're over-regulating at this point. These draft guidelines that they have out are taking away the choices we believe this board and the administrator should be making. They're saying, we want you to name your products. I'm saying to you, why does that have anything to do with the department? Why do they want us to name products? Town can do that. We've been doing it in aggregation for the last 20 years. And I'm here to tell you, just Colonial clients, now tremendously boosted by last winter, have about $480 million in savings compared to third-party supply that have cost over the last 4, which is $525 million. So that they try to lump us all in one pool. There's no profit margin with municipal aggregation. What we're trying to do is bring choice and stability into a very volatile market that's going to continue to be volatile for the next 3 years. So I just want you to know, from our standpoint, what the department is trying to do currently, they're doing it under the, I don't know if you noticed, in blue, we're going to file the DPU, and they're saying, and this is aggressive. 2 years currently, we don't see anything coming out of the department in 2 years. It's really 3 or 4 years. And that has been just because the department has not been willing to address muni ag issues. So guess what they're doing now? If you're willing to allow us to take away some of your authority and rights, we'll give you an expedited review in 4 to 6 months. But it comes with hooks, as everything does. I just want you to know, what they're saying is we have these draft guidelines. We have a draft plan, and we've been using that plan. When Denise files on your behalf, she has to file a plan that literally shows all of the changes from the last plan approved to your plan. So there's not a lot to review here. So this is, and again, I know what I'm saying in front of an open meeting here. I'm saying to you, the department is taking some steps I believe are not necessary. And they're not being, what I would say these draft plans is disingenuous in how they're offering to you as a consumer coming up, because you'll say, oh, well, I'll take the 4-month review. Well, what you don't know is they're asking you to choose a launch window, right now for 6 months after the plan is out there. So some of these things that are coming forward, so what they're saying is if I ask for an expedited review, they'll do it in 120 days. But to get that, I need to tell you in the marketplace when I'm going out. Well, I just wish I had that crystal ball, because I'd love to know what the market is going to be during those 10 months. so that I could give them that launch date. But the issue becomes, if I miss that launch date, I now need to stay out of the market for another 6 months. And I can tell you that just given what happened last year, historically high prices, and the market sold off later in the year. We had many aggregations come on. My take only, I believe they're protecting basic service customers, and you're doing exactly what the basic service was set up to do. You're entering the marketplace so that you can protect your consumers. And if anyone wants to go to basic service, that's there, but it's the service of last resort. Literally, we're at 50-50. Within 2 years, believe me, you're doing the right thing. What's going to be left on basic service is going to be dysfunctional. So make no mistake, get out while the getting is good. And I mean that honestly. You can always, all you're going to do is bring a choice. You're not telling anyone what they need to do. Other than, I want to make sure that I've stated this for the 5th time, it's opt-out aggregation. If they don't do something, they're going to be enrolled. Other than that, it's truly a choice that they did not have. So I just, again, I got it in there. Just want you to know there's a lot of chatter out there. If you're mentioning it to any other representatives or what have you, the department has finally addressed it. I just don't know if it's an honest attempt at it. I think it's disingenuous what they're asking you to give up to get into aggregation in a shorter time. I just want you to know there are probably 15 or 20 aggregations that we got up and running back, and all we're asking is go back to the old way you used to do it. This is a standard plan, approve the plan, allow towns to move forward. There's no harm and no foul, and we've done it back in 2015, 2016, 4 or 5 month review, no problem.
Yeah, allow Dudley to move forward like all 100+ communities who already have aggregations up and running have been up and running. There's no reason why everybody who's coming in now would be subject to different regulations than the plans that are already up and running that will now have to convert to these new guidelines at some point if that's decided in the docket. But it's just an open docket right now.
Okay, anybody have any questions? Mr. Sullivan?
Yeah, I'll go backwards. That was the question when we first, Mr. Ruda brought it forward. If all these other towns already had it approved, why would our new process take so much longer? They have their state template in place, and you folks know what you're doing. It should not be a up to 2-year review.
Initially, when we used to do this 10 years ago, it was a 4 to 6 month review. We're using the exact same documents that we were then. The only enhancements to these documents over the past 6 to 8 years have been the department adding additional requirements and restrictions and regulations into these documents when they're presented to the state. We haven't added any other requirements. Like Mark said, we send in a black line. The only differences from the previously approved plans are maybe the utility or the government structure. But the statute hasn't changed in all that time, so obviously the documents you submit to meet that statute aren't going to change. The law hasn't changed. So, but they've just been sitting on everything we have towns in there for 48 months at this point with the same plan that was filed. The towns got out in 4 months 10 years ago.
Second question, Mr. Chair, I thank you for that answer. I think he touched on it. If you're already enrolled, like a 3-year contract with a third party, and the town goes into aggregation, do you still have to opt out, or you won't be able to bump the person that's already into an agreement, right? You're talking about a straight National Grid person.
Exactly. So we'll only get people that are on basic service. Third-party supply will be outside. They can always come in and join the program, but we would actually be the town would be slamming a customer that had already made a choice. So when National Grid gives us the list, it's only people on basic service, nobody with third-party supply.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so my question is, what's the next step? Because if this is going to take years to get done, we probably don't want to be sitting on our hands much more.
So I think we have a couple of, or did you already make the changes, Denise?
Yep, the changes have already been made. Olivia and I exchanged emails this morning, so she should have, or you should have, the updated documents, and they're ready to post. So the town just needs to put them up whenever. I think some dates need to be filled in on the posting language, but other than that, I think the town has everything.
And they just need to be posted for 30 days, and once that's done, this board would then approve those as hung. That's all.
As hung, got it. Anyone else? Mr. Marson?
Yeah, no, guys, thanks. And thank you for explaining that. I think just for everybody who's going to watch it on replay and stuff, just it's always good for us to hear it as well, just when people ask us. And you're absolutely right. One of the things we heard a lot, including from myself, last winter, I have electric heat. It was bad, real bad.
Yeah, brutal.
And so I like the idea of giving people the choice to do that. I mean, on behalf of them, we just gotta make sure that we promote it properly and get it all out, because people don't wanna feel like anything's shady's happening to them. But I think I'm definitely on basic services. I get 100 of those things in the mail, and I'm like,
Yes.
I don't, but it just, this, if, saving money, you're giving people a choice to save money, or if they don't feel comfortable, they can opt out. So, we want to give that to the people if we can. Thank you.
I say we continue the process, Mr. Chair. Loud and clear last year, people were bombarding us with emails and phone calls.
Yeah.
Mr. Ruda, do you need a vote from this board, or do we just?
No, I just wanted to ask them to come out and give the board a public presentation, just to get an idea. So when you're asked and when people watch it, they'll have an idea as to what the holdup is and what's coming down the pike.
Well, thank you for that.
But I'll reiterate that the community, members of the community are completely in control of this program. This is not something I control, it's not something they're forced into, right?
That is 100% correct.
They absolutely have complete control.
As long as they understand and we're gonna do our best to educate, make no mistake, as many ways as we possibly can, but they get to choose whether if they don't opt out, they'll be in, but they can opt out and opt back in at any time. There's never a fee or penalty to do so.
And again, and this, I asked this question with one of our initial phone calls. How do you make your money? Is it on the backs of our community, or is it?
No, well, so there's a fee on the price. So just to be completely clear, our fee is 0.001, 1/10 of a penny. Say the price of electricity was 14 cents all in. The price that would be on the bill would be 14.1 cents, 1/10 of a penny. Everyone would just pay their bill to National Grid. National Grid would pay the winning supplier, and the winning supplier would pay us. There's not any fee from the town at all. There's no tax dollars used, there's no ads to staff, nothing like that. And that is all disclosed on the opt-out notice that goes out to everyone. Our fee is right on that, it's right below. And I think it's already on there in the documentation.
It's already on there, yes.
It'll be in the documentation that you already hang on the plan. But that's the fee.
So, Mr. Chair, that may be something we'd like to put on our social media pages and any other way people get their information. That's what the fee is, and that's what the cost is, and it's not, as you said, it's not an extra tax. It's not an extra staff at the town hall. It's not a hidden fee that we assess them as a town. It's just part of the fee. They're probably paying it to National Grid anyway. It's probably some kind of administrative fee in there anyway.
Believe it or not, their basic service cost adjustment is normally higher than that. So they pay more than that, they've received basic service.
And people have a choice.
Right.
That is correct.
Don't have to do it.
If you hate it, don't do it.
Right. Or try it, you don't like it, get out.
Mr. Clark?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Richard Clark, Airport Road. When? I may have missed that. I apologize if I did, but when does this become effective? When is this available to residents of the town of Dudley?
Oh, that's a great.
Can you put a date on it? Is there a date? Did I miss the date?
You didn't miss the date, and the reason is MuniAg is in flux, so I don't know if they'll try to push these guidelines, foist them upon us. We haven't had a lot of luck with the Department of Public Utilities with open dialogues, if you will. So right now, the October 6th is the date for comments on the guidelines, and then rebuttal comments are due on November 6th. There's a brand new administration, brand new Secretary of Energy at the DOER, as well as a chair at the DOER, as well as the DPU. We're hopeful that everyone has their ears open. We've talked to 90 of our communities, and we're hopeful that they'll hear the word that if they'll just go back and do what they used to do. If they don't, I can tell you we're not going to have a choice. We're either going to get an order in 4 months or 6 months, depending on how we wish to move forward. At this time, we have no choice but to hang the plan because we won't know for probably 4 or longer months on what the department's going to do with this draft guidelines and template plan.
Yeah, the documents you have meet the last order that came out,
Perfectly
that
stated.
was approved, so it's consistent.
Is this something we can lean on our elected leaders to push with DPU?
As a matter of fact, that's a great question, Mr. Marcy. I want to say this: we're going to be sending along our issues with the issues we see with the draft guidelines, as well as a letter that could be sent along to your representatives or senator, if you will. And maybe the town would want to send something in too. There's going to be a letter in there as well. That will all go to the administrator. How you decide to act, that's up to you. But it will all be there for you to forward on if you'd like.
One last question for me, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Sullivan?
If you don't have the information, I appreciate it. Could you get it to us? The bottom paragraph on both pages, basic rate changes twice a year or more. Do you have a historical number as to say it's changed, we've saved X percent? Because it says here it could go up, could go down, we understand that. Has there ever been a time where the aggregation, the muni ag has exceeded?
Yes, so especially when we have these wild swings, if you will. So I'm just going to give you an example. 34 cents and 14 cents. Let's just say that your aggregation rate was 15 cents. You will have saved some 19 cents a kilowatt hour over the 6 months in the winter. You would have given back a penny over this summer for 6 cents. But anyone could have opted out if they wanted to. That's not a problem. But lots of times, now it's going to be a lot less moving forward because they've now switched the way basic service is. So it'll be a little bit smoother. You won't see those wild swings. And that will start literally November 1st for you. But it's not, I want to state this, just so you know, it's truly the market. So depending on when someone went, if you wanted to know, trying to think of a town near like Franklin, I could show you what theirs was. I think they've been over a little bit, or no, they've been under the whole time.
Yeah, they've had a great rate for 3 years.
Yeah, they have had a great rate, but because we went long for 3 years, so a lot of the communities over the last 3 years have been under. The market has just risen since then. But I can certainly show you someone that's been over, slightly over, and then. But normally, I just want to say, historically, there has been savings vis-a-vis muni ag compared to basic service. Now, like I said, in my opinion, that contract still delivered savings
Over the life.
over that 1 year term. But certainly you were over in the summer, and any customer could have opted out. But some people may say, hey, well, you're over there. When I look at it, I look at the contract length. Now, again, that would happen 3 different times on a 36-month contract. So it really depends on where things are in the market. The reason this is on everything we put out, the Department of Public Utilities says anytime that you're mentioning price or cost or anything, this disclaimer has to be on the, and they will go out and make sure that this is on.
It's like a stock market disclaimer.
Unfortunately, that is correct. It is a market, right? It's the futures market in electricity. It's a commodities market.
And there'll be a web page on our website for the town of Dudley where you can access the basic service rate. So anybody can go on and click over to National Grid and see what the rate is. So no one's trying to, not tell anyone what the comparable rate is or whatever if folks want to opt out. There's a lot of folks who play the game and go back and forth. And then there's others who just like to stay in the comfort of a town-run program because they, there's not any fine print. So it's up to the individual, but all that information is out there and easily accessible. So no one's trying to hide anything.
Mr. Chair, what's your website?
colonialpowergroup.com.
I just want to make sure for people at home.
Yes.
Yes.
You do have a problem with the audio, but on the second play, it always comes on.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Anything else?
You're getting a look over there.
Well, some guy just texted me and said the volume's better, but he still can't hear it.
You, me?
No, it's not your fault. Oh. But on the YouTube channel, it comes in crystal clear. That's what I mean, the second time. Sorry, that's us, not you folks.
Anything else you'd like to add?
We don't have anything else for you.
Well, thank you very much for
Thanks
coming
for
out.
coming in.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your work on this.
And you said Olivia has all the information?
She does.
Post? Okay.
Yes,
Yep.
this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
You too now. Safe travels.
You can't get away from this anymore this evening. Town administrators report.
So the town administrator is going to present a draft supplemental budget for the Board of Selectmen. It's in your packets. There's also copies printed.
Supplemental budget docs.
That's that.
Okay.
So, I'll briefly go over what we did. And tried to stick as close to the guidance of the spirit of the vote. We got 3 passed questions out of 5, which I was very happy about, and I know the board was. The input that we received from the public and my direction from the Board of Selectmen in terms of priority funding. I'll be presenting this draft budget to the FAA at their meeting on the 14th. As the board's aware, there are 32 possible funding combinations depending on the results of the override. The amended July 25th budget contemplated one scenario, which was the passage of the override question for the increased school assessment amount. At the October 16th meeting, when we will make our final adjustments for the FY24 budget and put it to bed, part of the motion will be to rescind the July 25th budget that was amended on the floor. That will provide us with a clean canvas to balance the general government side of our FY24 budget. The law requires that the entire amount of the override questions be applied toward the funding sources approved by the voters. So, for the school assessment, for example, with the FY25 budget, with the current budget rescinded, we will begin at a zero balance and add in the entire amount of the question. So we would start, I'm just trying to give an example as how this is going to work. $901,683 was approved for the override question for the school assessment. We will start at $901,683 and we'll bring it up to the amount of the assessment that was requested, which was $10 million and change. We'll do the same for fire and police. We'll start with the entire amount that was passed by the voters, and we'll build the budgets up to the final request for FY24. And it's all going to be spread out on a spreadsheet for the warrant and article format for the October 16th. So you'll be able to see when you look at the spreadsheet, for example, the bottom line budget that was approved at for July 25th that was amended on the floor. The next column will be the proposed FY24 supplemental budget, and the third column will be the additional amounts that were appropriated for the override through taxation, through state aid, and so forth, similar to past format. So the idea will be to rescind and replace the budget. And you'll be able to see bottom lines, all of the sources of funding for those individual departments. It's pretty straightforward in comparison to the way it could have gone. So here are some of the key takeaways. The full amount of stabilization used in both the 522 budget, which was the 10% reduction budget, and the amended July 25th special town meeting budget being proposed, because the budget will be rescinded, that amount of stabilization that was used towards those budgets will be back into both the stabilization accounts. And we're not proposing to use any stabilization on October 16th. So we'll have our stabilization money back. That won't have to be applied to the FY24 budget. So that balance restored will be $593 in stabilization. I'm sorry, the adjusted balance will be $593 in stabilization, $200,541 in capital improvement stabilization. The free cash that we were going to apply, which is $17,050 from FY23 free cash amount, will also go into our reserve accounts. So we'll be back to an $811,373 balance in our reserve accounts. There's not going to be any, and so next there'll be no layoffs, as we've already talked about, in fire and police because of the support of the voters. Call firefighters are back on the job, and the fire department has not forfeited its ability to receive grant funding because of the layoffs. Maintenance, fuel, training line items in both budgets will be funded at the requested levels. The override question for the highway came very close to passing. It didn't pass. It actually passed in precinct 3. I think we talked about this before. And that's, of course, the section of town that gets hit the hardest, the western part of Dudley, with the snow plowing that's going to be happening in a few short months. So I'm happy to say that we won't be able to hire back all 5 positions lost over the past few years, but we'll be able to bring back 2 truck drivers and a mechanic, just in time for the snowfall. We'll be able to modestly fund road materials, we'll be able to fund tree removal, and we'll be able to fund maintenance, and we'll be able to remain compliant with dam inspection and stormwater regulations. Also, as I mentioned, the library will be fully funded just above the level contemplated on July 25th. That's the level that was amended on the floor, which was overwhelmingly approved by the voters at the meeting. The trustees will advertise for a library director this week. Did we, by the way, did we vote on lifting the moratorium on hiring yet? Okay, so they will hopefully be able to do that this week. The school assessment number has been met as a result of the passage of that override question, the additional tax revenue that the voters approved. The combination of the questions that passed allowed for the final adjustments that will fund a full-time health agent. That was one of the board's priorities. We don't currently have a health agent. Our IMA is canceled with, it's expired with the town of Webster. We were able to fully restore funding for a part-time building commissioner. We touched on that tonight. We restored funding for an associate building inspector. We touched on that as well tonight. And we restored funding for our town planner, which will enable us to restore positions, some positions lost in the town hall. Most critical, the assessors clerk, the assistant treasurer collector. And the sooner we can get this done, the sooner we can reopen the town hall. And I know everybody's anxious to do that. The town clerk's office will have sufficient funding to restore services in her office. We'll be able to restore public-facing services such as online permitting, vision appraisal, and cybersecurity. And as a result of having to make multiple funding adjustments over the last several months, we've also been able to realize some efficiencies. One of those efficiencies is with our ACO. We've had some discussions with the police union. The chief and I have discussed this with some neighboring towns and looked at models that they use. And we'll be able to take the existing budget of $15,000 that was slated for the ACO, provide a stipend to a full-time officer who will then turn around and get and be grant funded, will be trained through grant funding, 100% grant funding. And that's under negotiation right now. And I think that's going to be a great alternative for the town in terms of getting animal control back up and running. We'll have a 40-hour-a-week full-time person doing ACO work. We'll be within the same budget that we had in the past for our ACO. And it's going to actually, we're going to use an existing police vehicle with the balance of the stipend to upfit to be an ACO vehicle. And it's going to lead to some other benefits for the community that when that's in place, I'm sure the police chief will give us more information on. So, Mr. Chairman, we were fortunate that we were able to enlist the support of the voters to pass 3 of the 5 override questions on August 17th. The board, however, should consider this budget for what it represents. We're solid, but it's a status quo budget, meaning that we're not moving forward, we're not being pushed back, we're pretty much status quo. So where the budget will fund a full-time health agent because of public health is priority, it falls short of sufficiently funding our ability to hire, if required, a full-time building commissioner, should our building commissioner retire, which could happen at any second. It hires 3 highway guys back. It doesn't replace the 5 lost over the last 2 years. It funds grant and project design, but it funds it at about 30% of the level that we originally requested. So grant and project design will be impacted. We'll still have money to apply for grants and do special projects, but at the 30% level. It doesn't fund any new positions, including human resources, assistant town administrator. It doesn't fund any social work or any of those other positions that we spoke about. But it does provide some money to keep full-time people currently working, doing some additional duties that will help us out in those areas. So again, we're thankful for the voters that have supported 3 of those 5 questions, but we need to remain cognizant of the fact that we're going to be talking again about the FY25 budget in January. That's when the budget memo goes out again. So we really have to be cognizant of the fact that we're at a 2.5% increase in taxation only, and then taking it from there. We have to hold the line in terms of staying at that level. That includes the new school assessment, CVAs, and so forth. We have several contracts being negotiated within the next few months. So the budget packet contains a line item budget with those adjustments in it. It has the overview in it. It shows the stabilization money being returned to stabilization, not necessary, and then in this fiscal year. And I hope that we can, after my meeting with the FAA on the 14th, we can move forward, vote on it, get the warrant out, and get it approved at town meeting. One of the articles was for the assessors. I've actually included that into one of our line items instead of having to go through the exercise of putting money into stabilization and dragging it back out in order to fund the article. We just put it in a line item. That'll be a one-shot deal. And that was for cyclical inspections or something like that. Anything I can do to answer any questions on the proposed budget?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Landry?
I just have a little statement and a question. Good job on the budget process. Note through that there are 6 practical steps to get that going to where you are right now, and you did a great job on that. What I'm concerned with right now are regulations compliance to make sure that we're funded across the board. Are we at 100% with that or no?
So we made the move of removing one of the line items that would pay for regulatory and compliance issues, and we borrowed for it. We just talked about the cell tower that's going to be, well, actually the board voted last meeting to approve that cell tower with an initial $100,000 payment, a $20,000 annual lease fee for 20 years with a 3% annual escalator, and then we get half the cost of the cell sites that go on that tower. So we're going to use that to pay for the money that was authorized to be borrowed for the regulatory and compliance issues. So it is fully funded, not the way we would have liked to have done it, but that's the way we're going to do it for now. Also, we have money in this budget remain compliant for dams, dam inspections, and stormwater management. We're already going to be at the end of the first quarter of the year, so we're looking at a 70% budget going forward, so we should be fine with that.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Sullivan?
Yeah, if I can ask the treasurer, I noticed on here, maturing debt was proposed to be $595, went down to $365. Is that, obviously we must have paid some stuff off, but the next line below it is interest on debt went from $199,952 to $228,362.
Good evening. So, the original iteration of the budget had some debt exclusions, but did not have overrides. The original plan was to go through and pay as much as we possibly could in fiscal '24 as it was debt excluded. Right now, because we have an override being passed and we borrowed non-debt excluded money, we had an issuance August 1st. So instead of paying a whole bunch of money up front, we included those debt excluded items instead of in a shortened period over a longer period of time, so we could increase the par value that entered the market. That allowed us to we've restructured debt. So instead of paying it all year one, we're going to have a February interest-only payment with the next principal payment being in '25.
was to the tune, that's the 230,000 difference?
Quick math, we have a $110,000 brine machine. We have 2 public safety vehicles for 120. That's your 230,000. So what you've done, instead of paying it all on year 1, it was put in, and instead of being paid in 1 year, those were 4 years. The additional 60,000 for the cruiser that was purchased for this year will have 5 years. The other items would be 4. So again, we're trying to smooth your DE1, what's above your normal levy limit, so that we're not having that much of a spike. Also, adding more to the par value allowed you to get a better rate over time. Not everything in the August 1st issuance was 4 years, 5 years, 10 years. You have your Partridge Hill Road betterment, which was a unique dollar amount. You have Tobin Farms, another dollar amount. So you have those all at different lengths. You also have a water project that could have gone out for 40, but it was only 20. So we did our shuffling and made sure that the August 1st bond issuance was attractive to the market.
So the money went down, but the money we're paying on the interest of the debt went up.
Because you had to go through and pay that short-term note, and you, in essence, refunded the ban with structured debt.
So it came in higher?
Eventually lower, because we were able to get out longer into the market. You're in a unique situation right now where, you know, you see the advertisements for 5%. What's the 10-month bill? Is 3.5? Okay, so this was the best way to approach the interest rate, other than obviously paying everything as a capital exclusion or all for year 1. It's a big picture decision. And again, we'll bring in the fact that 380,000, whatever, for this building had come off as well. So your tax rate is, nobody could have modeled this. There were just too many factors spinning around. You've got 1.755 going on in a debt exclusion, or excuse me, the override, but you'll also have a lesser amount that was originally planned to go into the debt exclusion, the DE1, but not everything ties from the debt exclusion to the treasurer's budget, because you have Dudley Charlton has a capital assessment, you have Bay Path with a capital assessment, you also go through and have, oh goodness, the water, the sewer. Give me 10 seconds. So I've got this, it's unofficial, so your 2023 levy limit was the 13,588. Your 24 limit is going to be the 15,683. You added on 803 with the debt exclusion, and you had the 1755 for the 3 questions that were passed. So your increase is in there, but it's sort of muddled. Originally, the treasurer's line item had, like you said, it was a higher dollar amount on there. So instead of paying it all year 1, we're paying it into year 2. So we're not having that much of a spike for that next year. Because if you really wanted to, nothing would keep you from paying the fire station all in 1 year, but that's not practical. You went out, you borrowed the money, and sort of manage that cost over the 20-year period. And again, everything that you've borrowed in a fixed loan is going to have level principal and it'll have declining interest. So your year one fire station payment would have been the highest, and now we're slowly tapering it off. And just to round out a few things, the only thing you have debt excluded, other than the brine machine, the public safety vehicles, you have a fire engine that's coming up. You've got your fire station, and that's just about it.
All right, thank you.
If that makes sense.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rich. Mr. Marson?
Yeah, just another, on that thread, one of the things that we talked about during the original budget hearings was indirect costs. We all said we would sit down and figure that out once and for all to update what that list looks like, and so the better understanding of cost between the municipal and the water sewer budget. So I would like to see a meeting, or if we do that in public, or if it's a workshop, I'd like to see that done, because I noticed that cost has gone up in this new budget as well. So rather than have another potential blow up over that, let's do what we said we were going to do and try to solve that. And that's it. Who does that? I know the treasurer needs to be involved. So
Through the chair, are we renegotiating the indirects? Or are they asking to be renegotiated? Or
well, that's the.
Mr. Chairman, before the conversation goes forward, it's a calculation. So 98, 99, the Department of Revenue goes through, does their survey. This is how the town of Dudley operates. This is how much the water draws from the general fund. This is how much the sewer draws from the general fund. They had the basic calculations in there. These are sort of brought forward year by year by year. Independently, the Abrahams Group, in conversation, an indirect cost is supposed to be empirically driven. You need to be able to defend what's going on. How many hours does the town administrator spend towards the administration of the water department? You have 1 hour of his time, it's worth X, how many hours? So what you're looking to do is to revisit the formula on how that's done. And I agree with everyone up here, it needs to be a consensus. And as I mentioned, the Abrahams Group had that opportunity. If you wanted to go through and review sort of how it's done now, I guess that's the pleasure of the board, but it's an empirical formula. It's not anything else.
I get it. It's just that it was out of date based on like all the different line items that didn't line up. And
Right, so operationally, you had how many water accounts in 2000? How many sewer accounts? How many projects have gone on? And it's not a snapshot of the last 6 months. It needs to be an average of the last 5 years, give or take.
Right. So if we can agree upon what the line items are that contribute to the calculation, that'll be. I think that's the
right. And I would say there's got to be a few boilerplates out there, because an enterprise fund is not a unique thing. There's got to be so many costing manuals, costing formulas that are out there. You sort of have a starting spot, if both sides don't agree to what's there. Traditionally, the treasurer's office has been the one that it's a fill-in. You go through and say, okay, what was the cost last year? What is the cost this year?
Mr. Chairman, I'll just make a suggestion, because I think we're going to be at the same point we started at with this conversation, where there's a rub between what the commissioners feel are the indirect costs and what the treasurer is presenting as the formulaic way that he comes up with those costs. So why don't we just cut right through it, because ultimately, the 5 members of the Board of Selectmen are gonna have to make a decision. Why don't we cut through it and ask, maybe Abraham's could take a look at it? If the commissioners would be amenable to splitting the bill, to have an independent person look at the way it's done. It doesn't have to be Abraham's, it can be somebody that's mutually agreeable to both sides. And we'll just,
How much are we talking here?
I believe there was a quote provided.
yeah, 4 or 5 grand maybe.
Right,
the worst
and,
case.
and the idea is, you know, they're not reinventing the wheel. I'm sure they've done a costing other
Like Rich said,
places.
they say templates. There's another template that'll probably fit what we could use.
Find somebody independent.
I'm just asking, so this isn't like
Please.
$250,000 or something.
Oh.
A simple example, every billing cycle, for years, the bills would get processed, they would get folded, stuffed, postage and everything else, they'd be printed, everything would be done here in the building. We pay for that through the indirect costs. Well, now we're paying a vendor outside the building, we're paying for it. So if we're paying for it there, then why are we still paying for it in the building? See what I'm saying? We're paying a graphics company to do all of that paperwork.
I don't think we're gonna go on
That's
specific.
the kind of stuff that we need to talk about.
Mr. Chairman, and that's a legitimate argument that needs to be deconflicted, and I don't think that the board is the people who can do that. I wouldn't ever put you in a position where you're trying to decide why that is. Rich will give his methodology, okay, seems to make sense. Scott will say what he believes was a change that he doesn't understand. Okay, makes sense. What are we gonna do about it? Let's find an independent consultant to come in and take a look at it.
That's probably what's gonna have to happen, is we're gonna need an independent consultant that
And
knock it all.
again, I know this is budget talk, and I don't wanna, not asking Scott.
Yeah, I don't wanna get hung up in this.
No, but it's a line item on the
Right,
budget
right.
where that went up, that's why.
And
I
it's
brought
gone
it
up. Is it a yearly escalator clause of like 2 or 3%? Because if, for example, if Rich is doing bonding work for you in 2002, and I don't know what you're making Rich back then, we'll say 50,000. Now he's doing bonding work the same amount of time, call it 10 hours a month, at probably a high, I'm assuming it's higher than 50,000. That would, I would think, offset one of your arguments of a third-party vendor. So it did go up, but that's what caught John's eye. So without going too far down the rabbit hole, Mr. Chair, is there a built-in escalator clause? Because, again, your indirects is everything. It's your office space, it's your utility usage, it's usage of the facility. I understand it's a trade-off with hydrants, but costs have gone up on our side as well.
Yes, there are another simple example, we pay a portion of the treasurer's salary. We also pay a portion of the collector's salary. That's one person. We pay a percentage of the salary as a treasurer, we pay it, we're paying about 70% of his salary. He's not doing 70% of his work for water and sewer.
You pay 70% of his
We
salary?
do. Yes. That's the kind of things that, when things changed over the years, we pay for a personnel board. That's pennies. We haven't had a personnel board in 3 years.
But the personnel functions are somewhere else.
But
Put on a paid employee as opposed to a volunteer board. So that would change, your zero would change to a paid person. Because the personnel board didn't get any money.
I don't
Right.
think tonight's the night to argue these individual things.
Correct. No, I agree.
Tonight's not the night to do
No,
this. We can agree to
Mr. Chairman,
Abrams group or something, but we're not gonna argue individual things
Mr. Chairman,
tonight.
my original reason for bringing this up was we promised we would take a look at it. I would really like to do that. We said we're gonna do it. We're gonna follow
I
through.
think there's a plan in place too.
Let's do it that way.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Clark?
Gentlemen, thank you again. Some time ago, there was strong sentiment in town with regards to an audit. And I think, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the word conversation, to begin a conversation with regards to that process. Are there provisions within this budget for such to take place?
Budget as far as,
Conversation started, at least at some level?
as the conversation, yes, it has started. Past preliminary discussions are going on right now. And as far as the budget, if you could come back.
Yes.
Because this is kind of what I do during the day. For us to have an outside audit would be an expense, and that's not something that we could fit into this budget. Because either an operational or a forensic audit, those are the two big ones. The operational would show efficiencies, management structure, how things are done. But a forensic audit, those type of auditors are used to focusing on something small. Hey, we've got something here that we want you to look at. And for us to say, hey, take a look at everything, that's gonna be expensive. So we'd have to get quotes for both. Right now, we're speaking with someone from the state. We're gonna see where that goes, because free's always better than a couple six-figure. My educated guess would be, it would be six figures.
Well, frankly, I would leave it to the result of the conversation, if you will, whatever that happens to identify as the correct methodology or the correct process or whatever that process might be. As you indicated, apparently the conversation has begun, so I assume that will continue until there's some resolution there.
It will be continued. It's not getting swept under the rug.
Okay, thank you.
You know,
Again.
Mr. Chair, too, real quick, I wasn't here at the last meeting, I don't know if the audit came up, I've caught up with John a little bit, this John. My feeling, without talking to anybody else on the board, we would be remiss if we didn't at least attempt to insist that the schools have to go through some kind of audit, either hand in hand with us.
The process.
Because the driving force behind this financial crisis was the school's increase. I mean, the town has always increased within its means. So I think it's not anti-school. I had 4 children go through the school, right? Some of you guys on this board went through the schools. The driving problem was not the town. The biggest issue with the finances was the schools. So I think at a minimum, we need to engage them into a equal and similar forensic audit. That means if we have to, or if we are able to open everything up, I think it's only fair that the schools have to provide the same level of information. And we can make that clear. I mean, I'm not saying the town wouldn't do it outside of the school doing it. I think we should, as John's been working, but we need to have dialogue with them to come in and agree that they should undergo the same scrutiny we are, because if our books, and the numbers don't lie, if our books are gonna get opened up at, what's the override amount put us at now, 11 million? No,
The general fund?
yeah, what does it, I don't need the exact figure, but if we're gonna,
15 million?
15, and the schools are at what?
10.9?
Other way around, isn't it? Well, if we're gonna,
Because, see, that's part of it.
oh, because of
When
indirects.
Rich is, well, not the indirects, but also the borrowings, are part of
Right,
considered
that's a
revenue.
pass-through.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the bottom line numbers, even if they're fairly equal, I just think the schools need to be engaged in some kind of similar, equally in-depth audit.
Should be, because they're half the town. They're half our expenditures, aren't they?
More than half.
Give or take? Yeah, more than half.
Right.
And I also think come budget time, I'd like to see a 5-year, year-over-year increase, both the town side and the school side, to show where the increases are coming from. And I'm not saying that the schools don't need the money. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we've got X amount of money to spend, and that's it. And if people want more, like they did this past year, they have to go to the polls, they have to go to town meeting and say that they're willing to spend more. But I think unjustly so, the town side got a little more of the grief as far as the tax increases than the school side. I'd like to show where the increases were. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I know the town side was not as much of an increase as the school side. I just went down a rabbit hole there.
No.
Where were we? I'll keep going.
You're in a big rabbit hole.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just remind everybody that our annual audit is located on the website and available for anyone to view, as well as the single audit that we do for grants. So if there's a discrepancy that somebody finds with those annual audits, that usually triggers the deep dive audit. If we want to skip those regular audits, that's fine. But at least everyone who's interested in this, do yourself a favor and look at those audits before we go down the rabbit hole of what we're talking about here.
Right.
Is it possible, the people that do our audit, is it possible to get them to come to a meeting? Not even to take questions, but just even if just to go over a Reader's Digest version of what they do. Because I think people think that we just send them documents, they look at it, flip through, take a couple things, sign off on it and go. I don't think they realize what
We
goes
certainly
into
could do that, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to look into that and see if there's a cost associated with it. But there's a guy in the back of the room who knows that the audit's not a joke.
Oh, I know he does.
Mr. Chair, as Rich is coming up, they do come in every year.
Yeah.
At the end of the audit, they go over the management letter, they go over the summary.
Yeah.
They're here, it's part of the cost, and I get it, more people are trying to pay attention than probably ever before. But the opportunity I've been on the board 20 years, 4 years on the planning board. The opportunity has always been there. As town council comes to a meeting, they're here getting paid, they're here to answer questions. They've come every year and defended their audit, defended their results. Rich has incorporated suggestions, town administrator, whoever it was. So it's not, like you said, we're not hiding things. It's a deep dive. And he can speak on it better than I can.
It's an expensive fishing trip is what it is.
Yeah.
I know, but it for the people, by the people, of the people, on and on and on. And if the people want it, and if the people want to spend the money for it, let the people have it. Mr. Carmignani?
There was more, I heard the gentleman in the back, so I came up here. It's done. You had people go through and buy your bond issue. That's what the auditor, the certified public accountant, raises their hand and say, yes, this is the town of Dudley and here are their finances. You can go through and find a lot in your audit. You can tie it out to your budget. All of your debt ties out. Money's returned. Your stabilization is listed there. They'll list your deficiencies. They'll go through every year and say the Mass Municipal Depository Trust is not FDIC insured. So technically it's the state pool, but there are monies that are not collateralized or covered by federal insurance. But they need to because they are auditors. The money at Webster 5, $250,000 FDIC, DIF beyond that. It lists out everything. It'll also list through your warrants payable. You should be able to tie back your cash balance in this. So, and it's pretty uniform. Every year there's a new governmental accounting standards board. Maybe the call is they're looking for more specific expenditures. I would dare say that the school goes through the same audit the town of Dudley does. It's a little different functionality-wise, but you know, if you had X students and you received a Medicaid reimbursement, they would have reviewed that at one point. So I think there are school audits available. They're issuing debt. I think people want an audit because they're unhappy, and it's an easy phrase. If you want some transparency, in some city of Boston, city of Cambridge, somebody sit there and put all the AP checks out there that you've gone through and you've paid $5,000 in fuel oil to heat the school, whatever it is. I don't know exactly what somebody wants by an audit, but they walked up day 2 and said, hi, we didn't ask for these things on day 1. This is what we're looking for. And the idea is they're looking to find an inconsistency, an irregularity, or something reportable.
So it's not a rubber stamp. They don't just.
It's anything but a rubber stamp. There were some minute items that required a great deal of research, and whether the town passes muster or not, they need to go through and tick all the boxes on it, so.
Public seems to think it's a rubber stamp, Rich. I don't believe it is, do you?
If it's a rubber stamp, you'd expect it to be a little cheaper, wouldn't you, right?
That's a good point.
You're right.
No, but I don't think I don't
and-
think Mr. Scanlon would like to hear that either.
But it's a certified public accountant. It's not,
Right.
these are some buddies we used to play golf with, and they do the audit. This is,
But the important thing is that why we keep coming back to this, and why Mr. Clark brought it up, is restoring trust, right? And, whatever we need to do that, without, like I said, going down the wrong path on that.
I think there was a step made in the correct direction where the town of Dudley looked to raise non-real estate house tax revenue moving forward. You put your best foot forward on that. There are some people who think it's a great idea. Others have other plans for that piece, but love to see more of it. I have to pay my real estate taxes too, and the idea that the Board of Selectmen is looking to bring in additional revenues to the town, that's the right direction. 2.5 will never catch you up with things. You need to sort
Revenue
of.
problem, right, Rich? Right,
Well,
that's
the
right. Raise
problem-
revenues or increase your
Right.
taxes.
The problem is, Mr. Chairman, we can't say no before we say why.
Thanks, Rich.
That was the bottom line with that presentation tonight. People were saying no before we could even say why. So to look at something for free, classic no-brainer. My opinion.
Aristotle once said, "It's the sign of an educated mind to entertain a thought and not accept it." Next on the agenda, are we done with your, that was a little nod to Mr. Joseph. Next on the agenda, Mr. Ruder, are we good with your report?
Yes, please.
Motion to accept.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous.
Thanks, Jay. That was a lot of work.
Yes, it was. Next on the agenda, Board of Selectmen to discuss next steps regarding opening Town Hall and Senior Center, continued from 8/21/23.
Mr. Chairman, just to pick up on what was originally discussed, I'm going to ask you to lift the board to vote to lift the hiring freeze. Michelle will be on posting everything tomorrow if we do that. And the sooner we get some staff back in here and we can handle the volume, the sooner we can get those doors open. We've made some accommodations for a couple of events that were coming up with the senior center so that there was some accommodations made for luncheon and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
But it's no way to continue to operate. We need the staff back up. People spoke, they voted, they approved the override. Didn't approve it for the town hall, but we have adjusted so that we can make some changes and hire some staff back. And I think we should do that as soon as possible.
It's fantastic.
So what do you want for a motion?
So we have to lift the hiring freeze first, right?
Gotta do C before we do B.
Yeah, Chairman will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, make a motion to lift the hiring freeze effective immediately and to authorize town administrator to prioritize posting vacancies beginning September 12th, 2023, internal and external, until filled, or take any other action relative thereto.
Second.
Motion and a second, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Back to work.
So, Mr. Chair, with your direction, I don't think we need a motion, just as Mr. Root is able to fill these positions, I think under his authority as town administrator, we let him handle the opening of the town hall and the senior center. I don't want to come back in 2 weeks and find out we could have done it. For example, we could have done it a week earlier, just as vacancies are filled and he finds it appropriate.
As soon as possible.
So it's
As soon as we can handle the
You're right.
volume, we'll do it.
with the people,
Right.
No
with
question.
the right staff in place. Yeah.
That's, I'll take care of 9B.
That take care of 9B. We got 9C done. That's it. On to board member, well, we don't have, under departmental communication,
I
do
think
you have anything else, Chief?
Real quick, if I can just revisit Mariano Conti's resignation. There was a note, I was going to request that he be put on the reserve list. There's no cost to the town. He would still be available to work part-time. He's got all his certifications up to date, so would just be asking if we can just amend that to add him as a reserve officer expiring December 31st of this year.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Mr.
Next
Chair.
agenda, we can do that.
No, we could do it right now.
We can do it?
It's any other action relative
Oh, there
there
too? Oh, we could.
Okay.
Oh, I make
So
a,
then the motioner and the seconder need to amend their motions,
Just make a
correct?
new one.
or make a new one.
Or make a new one.
Yeah, so moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous.
Okay, good. Glad we could do that tonight.
Next, Jeff, do you have anything?
I just wanted to thank the board for lifting the hiring freeze. And Michelle will be posting this 2 positions for the truck drivers tomorrow and the mechanic for the highway department, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to draw some qualified candidates. And I know that in talking to some of the other towns, they've had difficulties with being able to do that, and hopefully we're able to bring people in, so.
Jeff. George, do you have anything? Nothing.
Where'd Dean go?
Rich, I know you've been up a lot. Do you have anything else?
Yes.
Your input's appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Not specifically treasurer collector. There's going to be, is it the 23rd, is the toll booth for the Knights of Columbus. That's coming up, so appreciate the Board of Selectmen doing that. We had it last year. It worked well. The rain date is the 30th, though I think we've had more than enough rain. Appreciate the board lifting the hiring freeze. A little bit of breathing room. Fingers crossed there's some great applicants that come through. Again, if there's any questions, I always add this, questions, inquiries, somebody needs a deeper dive on something, happy to answer it. Even if it's the public, hi, why do we spend X on Y? Happy to answer those. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you, Rich. That's it. Board member comments. Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I was just thinking, as we're talking about staffing, we had at least two full-time staff members that were furloughed or laid off that got employment in other towns, I believe. I'm not sure if this action was taken at the last meeting, but it was Mary and Caitlin. Can you, on our behalf, send them a letter thanking them for the service as we did for the other people? I was told just before, after the agenda was posted, before the meeting, I wasn't here last meeting, so if I'm missing something, there was a report about from the engineer on the project about the pavement thickness. We discussed, Jeff had some suggestions, Chairman of the Water came up, Richard talked about bonding, but it was my understanding the Water Commissioners voted to give the money back to the contractor. Not sure what kind of assurances we got that the road will be okay. It's not an agenda item, so I would appreciate some kind of report or a presentation at the next meeting why that was done, when we had some concerns as highway commissioners based on their engineer's report. And as I stated that night, I don't care if it was only a couple percentage points off. We had some concerns.
If I could interrupt it, would you, on the next agenda, we can talk about it?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I just want to bring that up. I don't want to discuss it tonight, but I just want to out there on the radar. And this isn't, as Rich just, not quite a town thing. We've all kind of followed the career of Chris Lindstrom. We had him in here for a presentation a couple of years ago, and I just want to recognize that Chris was voted a captain for the first time in his career for the Atlanta Falcons. And I just send out congratulations to Chris as his career just continues he just continues to excel in his field. So to Chris and his family, congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Landry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank everybody for tonight. A lot of great information from professionals here and outside the town. For Mr. Rudin, the great job he's done with this budget and the process. Michelle, great job, as always. keep up the good work, and we're here for everybody. Great conversation, covering every angle tonight, keeping it nice. I hope we can keep that moving forward and keeping it nice moving forward. We're all here together, make it a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Landry. Mr. Marcy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, tonight was a great meeting. I really liked the presentation for the grant-funded proposal for economic development. It's always good when we can at least even take a look, even if it's something that isn't feasible. We at least know a lot more about what we own and what could work there. So it gets the conversation started, so that was great. So thank you to everybody who got the grant for that, and to the people who did it. And then giving people choice for their electric bills, and now we watch the red tape of the Massachusetts and DPU and all that stuff, so hopefully we'll get that over the finish line. And the budget, it seems like this has been like it reminds me of the song of the Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the song that just keeps going on and on and on. I kind of like the song, but this budget has gone on and on and on, and it is coming to a conclusion next month. Everything's going to be okay. Thank you again to the voters who funded things that are important to the town, so we can. And then Jonathan, a great work working with the town administrator, with the town departments, and Michelle to put that together. So taking our feedback on priorities to make sure that we have something that we can live with and work with through the winter as we start all over again in the spring. Like you said, it's a status quo budget, but it's better than what we had and what we were facing. So I just can't stress that enough, that we're in a way better spot than we would have been. So thanks to everybody who saw through the noise and got that done again. So yeah, so let's got a couple more weeks of meetings of that and the budget discussions, and we'll all vote on it October 16th. Hope to see everybody there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Marcy. I have nothing to add to what all the board members have said. The two things I was going to bring up are already brought up. You don't need to hear me talk anymore. Chair will entertain a motion for adjournment.
Mr. Chairman.
Second. Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Unanimous.